Objective taken.
Reminds me that it's not so bad. It's not so bad. Please don't go to wonder
By the way, if my internet flakes, is that a problem for you? I apologize. I can fix it, but I'm on a lone computer right now, and so my system's a little bit wonky. Just giving you a warning.
You
sound
good. I've got hotel internet, so I may drop out at periodic intervals.
Yeah, but
Apologies.
go ahead. I just wanted to let you know.
All right, so tonight we got Adam Smith in Expat Aftermath. I'm going to pay a little homage to our guest tonight. I wrote something here. Somewhere between utopia and reality, the Chinese dream is an official policy whereby the country of China will become an economic superpower and its citizens supporting this policy, hoping that individuals could somehow ride the wave of national advancements and also become wealthy. In the twilight of globalization and social upheaval, many wonder if China will overthrow the United States in its quest for global dominance. The People's Republic is an engineer's, architect, and developer's fantasy. To have such a blank canvas and unlimited funds is the first in mankind. Yet what they build is nothing more than a draconian nightmare of mimicry, smog, and cement walls. Tonight, we are joined by Myth of the 20th Century's very own Adam Smith, author of Exit Strategy, Navigating the Decline of the American Empire, discuss China's real estate transformation, capital flight, and what it means for us in the West.
Wow. I don't know how I can top that. Thanks for having me on, of course. Yeah, and he alluded to my book, which came out almost 3 years ago now. Pretty scary, but it's not much different now, if not worse. It effectively didn't talk too much about China, but this is nothing new, I'm sure, for your audience, but it charts a course for the decline of our empire. And obviously the obvious counterpart or contrast to that is what's going on across the Pacific and China, where they've had a tremendous rise. And I share some of your observations that some of this is a little bit of smoke and mirrors, or not all, as GDP statistics might indicate, as being just a steady upward rise in quality of life and everything. But I would say that the progress they've made is real. It's not financial engineering like a lot of people might think. There is some of that, of course, but the trains are real, the skyscrapers are real, the manufacturing is real. And China has definitely gotten wealthier. So it may not be perfect, but I think they've done a decent job. And compared to our country, if we even want to call it a country, I think we need to respect and learn from what they've done. There's things that obviously I don't want in my society, but anyway, should I explain who I am? I don't know if you want me to introduce myself. I'm just giving you
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Adam.
Yeah.
Some of my viewers are familiar with your podcast. Again, it's an absolute pleasure. I wanted to do a little homage to you at the beginning, kind of, those little introductions to your show. And, I don't have the Moby music queued up or anything like that, but, please tell us about yourself, man.
No, good on you for even recognizing it. A lot of people don't even know where that's from. It's from the movie Heat, and it's when Al Pacino's getting in the helicopter to go across the urban hellscape of Los Angeles. So that's where our music intro comes from. Yeah, good scene. But in any case, our show is called Myth 20th Century. As the name might imply, we focus on the history and the impact and the legacy and the myth of the 20th century, its aftermath. What did World War II really do to the world? How did America become an empire? Why is it an empire? Why are we living in the shadow of an empire that is seemingly grasping for life, that never seems to be able to put its feet in front of one another, even correctly? anymore. It used to do great things. It's running on fumes. And what do we do as the little people? And how do we decipher the propaganda and extract some truth from it? That's really what we're doing every episode. We cover topics. That's the sort of format. We try to dive into things as broadly focused as political topics. A lot of my co-hosts and myself included like to do industry and engineering stuff, but we'll pick a company like Lockheed and talk about the F-35 strike fighter. And we had a guy from Lockheed come on once and talk about that with us. We've had guys who talk about the European Union. We've had people, EMJ came on back when we were still kind of a young show. We had John McAfee come on before he left the scene. So check us out. Cody Wilson from Ghost Gunner fame.
James LaFawn, he's a popular reoccurring guest. He's really good.
He's fantastic. He's honestly probably my favorite guest. He just doesn't have as widely known a name, but I would definitely agree. He's a great one too. Yeah.
The one show you did, probably my favorite was Signal versus Noise. I mean, that was such a entertaining conversation. You guys were talking a little bit about the Vietnam War and how reconnaissance and basically how people get information during the Cold War. It was fantastic. I mentioned to you before we started chatting the Driving Sideways, the Teamsters. That's probably my favorite. And with the war in Yugoslavia, and recently you did a show, I think about 2 months ago, where you started talking a little bit about China. And I had written an article in the American Sun, and you were the only person that left a comment. And I was like, "Wow, cool!" Adam Smith read my piece on real estate.
Oh, it's well written.
Oh, thank you so much. Andy Nowicki edited it for me, and I also would like to thank Hank and I think Ryan Landry for editing some of my work before posting it. So please send my gratitude and thanks to them next time you speak to either one. So what I sent you an email. I wanted to know what you found so interesting about Chinese real estate and basically how China has managed its way to being the second most powerful country in the world during the age of globalization.
Well, I'm just looking through my notes, and I have a lot here, but just looking at it holistically, taking a step back, I think East Asia has an economic model that is a direct threat to the middle class of the West. And it's not something that I view the same way as I view our sort of financial overlords who live in Manhattan, by the way. It's something I actually respect because I think it's more honest and traditional based. It's basically just hard work. And I think they have a population that is intelligent and diligent enough to outcompete, frankly, what used to consist of the middle class in the United States, for example, in the manufacturing sector. A lot of China's rise mirrors what happened in Japan, happened in South Korea and Taiwan. Some of that was intentional from the United States because of complete arrogance on the part of the U.S. State Department, trying to grow these economies up to put them under the umbrella of the U.S. empire. And then use them as sort of bulwarks against the communist world. After China sort of abandoned communism, it was sort of encouraged to join. But they've become rivals because they're good at what they do. There's limits to what they've done, though. And I think what happened in Japan in 1989, 1990 is sort of starting to happen in China. So it's very interesting to see where this is going to go. But the valuations for property in China are insane. I mean, it's worse than what it was in Japan. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but roughly what I remember, the sort of rent to valuation ratio, like what is your yield on a piece of property? It's microscopic. They don't even rent these things. I mean, they don't let people live in the apartments apparently in China because it's viewed as like contamination or something. So they're not actually revenue producers. They're just, in theory, on paper, producers of income. And so that's even worse. But you can think of it like a P&E ratio for a stock. I mean, it's like 100 to 1 now. And in the United States, it's getting bad, but I was reading the latest issue of Forbes, and it just sort of randomly appeared that some of these like junk bonds that are being sold throughout American cities are basically offering properties at like 33 to 1 in terms of, you can think of it again in like terms of a price to earnings ratio, or a cap rate or something. I think in real estate they use that term, but the which is the reciprocal of that. I think it's like, again, the yield. So anyway, just things are overvalued. They've been saying this for 10 years, and the Chinese are smart because they know what happened in Japan. It blew up, and so they're trying to sustain it and not blow up, and that's, I think, what Emperor Xi is trying to do. So that's the long and short of it. It's fascinating. Again, I do think that the Chinese, Japanese, all the Asian tigers, dragons, whatever, are real. You know, they're not Goldman Sachs. I mean, they're actually producing real goods. They add value to the world, but they have gotten so dependent on the growth model that it's not something that they can continue, you know, without adding, you know, an entire new market, which they don't have. I mean, after the export market effectively dried up for them, it didn't dry up. It's just like the limits of what they could continue to make. They've already like reverse engineered everything. Okay, so what are they going to do next? Like start making 747s? I mean, like there's not that much left that the Chinese haven't figured out how to make. So what they did was they put all their economic targets on property development, which is what the Japanese did. And it got them in trouble because they were just, it's not productive, frankly. It looks like it on paper, but you're assuming that you're going to have people to live in these things, and they're then going to be productive if they're office buildings, and they're just not. I mean, a lot of Japan's rise, and I have some knowledge of Japan, is that they were just opened up to a world market under the U.S. empire umbrella for the first time. And again, just the high IQs and the high discipline was on offer on a global scale for the first time. And they also were recovering from a war, so they were very motivated to work their asses off. And they were effectively taking over industries that they didn't invent, but they're good students, and so they could reverse engineer everything. And a lot of that initial growth came from the fact that their price of labor was very cheap, but incrementally that went up. And the West sort of got its act together, and there's some theories as to what actually happened in around 1990 in Japan. We did a show on it about the book Princes of Yen, which was a German economist actually, who lived in Tokyo. His name was Werner. Pretty sharp guy, and he sort of intimates that he thinks it was sort of like an economic hit because it's very suspicious that the ministers of finance in Japan would take a country with extremely low unemployment, continuous like GDP growth, and then just upend the economic model. Like, why would you do that? And they basically said that, or the finance ministers in Japan said that the hyper growth model was a threat to Japan because it was sort of leading them down a path that might actually be a bubble, and it sort of was. And so they were kind of like trying to get out in front of that, perhaps. And I think, again, that's what China's trying to do. The difference between China and Japan, though, is that Japan sort of depends on the United States for its military and its nuclear umbrella against China, mainly. And Japan kind of had to play ball a little bit more than I think the Chinese are willing to do. And the guys in Washington, after end of history, Cold War ended, thought that they can get China to play ball, and I think they underestimated them. So I think China's been more capable in leading its own people down its own course, which involves Russia to a degree. But I don't know, I'm speaking very broadly, so I'll just stop there. Hand it back to you guys.
No, 100%. You alluded to maybe China not being on ball, and that's something that I've been contemplating with for about a good year to 2 years. How much overlap is there between COVID and China? Like, was China really behind it? Was this just a massive psyop operation? I mean,
A lot of my smart friends, they admit they don't know this, but we were theorizing when this first happened that we thought it was a hit against the Chinese from the U.S. I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I think what's happened though is that all the bureaucrats have used it for opportunistically to take power, regardless of what the initial intent was. Could have just been an accident, but I think it was a lab produced disease, and that much I think I'm more than not confident on.
Well, it would appear, you know, I don't think we know this for sure, but it seems that there was a collaboration between American and Chinese scientists to create
Definitely
virus, right? So, I mean, where does the blame really lie? Trump constantly called it the China virus, right? But he never really held China accountable in the sense of saying, okay, open all your books to us, let us investigate that lab, or else we're going to blockade, we're going to stop all trade with you, for example, which is something I might have done if I were president. But we didn't do that because I think the finger of blame would ultimately have been pointed back at the U.S., at the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and Fauci and Peter Daszak and Eco Health Alliance and all these people that were really funding the research.
Well, here's what neither of them want to admit. I think it was both, and I don't know who sort of kicked off, the proverbial petri dish off of the table, but I mean, it was a joint venture. Okay, so exactly. They want to blame the other guy, but like I blame both of them. I mean, they're both corrupt and
yeah.
So
it was designed in America, made in China. Funded by America, made in China. Who's more to blame? Assuming that's what happened. I don't know that that's proven, but that's certainly a plausible hypothesis.
Yeah. You're never going to get straight answers, and I mean, it's just, yeah, it's too. I don't know if you know Judy Mikovits, I think is her name. She got kind of censored, sort of like how that Malone guy who did the mRNA work is getting censored now. She looked at how the virus was designed, and she said it was very reminiscent of sort of the virology work she was doing on the HIV virus. And there's a pretty good documentary, which I saw when this all happened. I don't remember all the details, but it was, I think, called Plandemic, which got banned off of YouTube.
Naturally. Yeah, well, the French scientist who discovered the HIV virus, analyzed SARS-CoV-2 and said it's definitely man-made. So, yeah, I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole.
I mean, look, we could look at this from a non-malevolent point of view as well. Right. I think the sort of benefit of the doubt that I could extend to these people, not that I trust them, but it's possible that they were trying to do something good, is that they were working on a controlled variant of SARS, which they thought that if they mutated it into a form that they could adapt into something that maybe would be preferably released into the wild, then they could develop a countermeasure to that, in a sense that they've done this stuff before. I think people have tried to do it for malaria. Like they've basically tried to create like an artificial strain of malaria that actually outcompetes the natural strain, but it's designed in a way that they could develop a vaccine to it. And so if that's what they were trying to do, I mean, I get it. But this opens up a broader debate as to biological research in general, because bioweapons, for example, I mean, have officially been banned, but nobody really believes that it's actually completely banned. And I think that's probably why this research was going on in China, was because they have laxer controls on it. So you know,
Agreed.
but then like, okay, they have laxer controls, so look what happened. And so maybe maybe it was just they screwed up, maybe it was intentional from the Chinese, maybe the US was trying to do it intentionally to embarrass the Chinese. How the hell do any of us know?
No.
It's all possible, but the only thing we can sort of say is that this thing is not that deadly, and the sort of response that the governments have imposed on us. And when I say government, I don't just mean the government. I mean the sort of collaboration between, you know, pharmaceutical companies, wealthy banking interests, whatever, to impose controls on us has been way more costly than I think whatever the disease would have brought. And so that part I think is most objectionable and fairly obvious to anybody, in my opinion, who has a brain. But
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. I mean, what? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the blogger Eugipius. He's on Twitter a lot, and he has
I
a
think I've
Substack.
seen. Yeah, is he German or something?
He's
Or,
German, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen
Not
that.
a virologist or a scientist, but just really a brilliant guy who uses his brain. And he made a comment that, what if we just had corona without any of the measures? Would it really have been worse? And of course, the answer is no. I mean, it would have been much better. And we would have probably had roughly the same number of deaths,
Yeah.
just without the totalitarianism. You know,
Yeah.
so I mean, there's a lot of deep questions that need to be asked about our response to this alleged pandemic.
Well, and I'll ask you guys, just, you know, as compatriots on this ship that's sinking, like, we can't unwrite, you know, the Titanic, but we can sort of deal with the mob that is like fighting us for a life preserver. And so what do you guys see going forward with this mob that we all have to deal with? Like I call them the mask Karens. It's like those people bother me the most because I have to deal with them. I mean, I have to deal with the policy of, you know, the drunk captain who hit an iceberg also, but I can't get to him. I have to deal with Karen. And so that's the frustration that I have. I just, my general policy in life is like I work around her, but unfortunately she presents herself more than I would like. And so I have to deal with her. And so it's like, what do you guys, what's your tips for dealing with this? Because I think it's only going to continue because these women, they love it. And it's not just women, but it's like the women mentality of just following the sort of zeitgeist and like BLM, Black Lives Matter kind of crap. Same thing. They go with what the cultural sort of tide is, and then they sweep you along with it. And if the tide is like going into a rock, it's like, well, you can't do much about this wall of water that we're all being pushed with. So I build my boat, you know, I try to go the other way, or actually the advice is don't go against the tide, go tangentially, you know. That's sort of like the riptide advice. Maybe that's the strategy, but I'm just curious what your guys' theories are. Yeah.
I'll start by saying that for the past year, I've actually become more and more recluse, and I've actually been avoiding people. And that's unlike me because I enjoy meeting, you know, new people, new characters. You know, get to know the other person because no one really asks questions about the other person. But this past year. And I've said this quite a few times on the show that I just don't want to talk to anyone anymore, and it's not healthy. You know, so it's hard.
I would second that. I mean, I would say I have two responses. The first is the noble response, which is always speak the truth. You know, follow Václav Havel's advice from, you know, his famous essay, and I forget the title of it, but the sort of catchphrase is always live within the truth.
The greengrocer, something like that.
Right, about the greengrocer. So the greengrocer puts the sign saying "Workers of the World Unite" in his window. He doesn't actually believe that, right? That's just virtue signaling. And, you know, I mean, obviously, this is referring to the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So everybody virtue signals. Everybody sort of pays homage to the discourse, right? The narrative. Well, stop doing that. You know, if somebody is talking nonsense about COVID or racism or climate change or whatever else, just call them out. Just say, no, I don't believe you. And sometimes it's really as simple as that. You just say, I don't believe that. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I try to do that. I'm kind of bad at that because I like to avoid confrontation, especially with liberals in my family or whatever, which is a huge problem. So then my other response is always be avoiding. Similar to what Lamprey is saying, just get the hell out of the way. I mean, that's why I'm traveling right now in the South. I'm trying to get away from these blue hives in the Northeast, which have been completely taken over by this COVIDian insanity. I can't fight it myself.
Right.
There's an individual who's a military veteran who is getting himself arrested at various establishments in New York City because he doesn't have a vaccine card, and he's trying to eat at Panera Bread or McDonald's or whatever, and he keeps getting arrested. And he's doing this as a protest against the inhumane vaccine passport system. But the average New Yorker, even if they quietly sympathize with him, the Karens are in charge. They're completely in charge. There's
Yep.
nothing you can do about that in a place like New York City. So my attitude is just don't even try. If the majority of the population is either supportive of this madness or they're just completely passive, I'm not going to sacrifice myself to save a blue hive. I'm going to leave.
I agree. I agree with that. What I worry about is, in general, I'm a worrier, so don't take this personally. So it's just I always look for, well, what ifs, and I see this pattern because it definitely happened when 2020 rolled around that people were fleeing the cities and relocating. If you can afford to do that and if you can earn a living doing that, it makes sense. And I've done that. I've actually done it prior to COVID, thankfully, but it worked for me. I know other people that have struggled with it because they don't have the ability to basically earn a living doing it. But what I worry about is that there's just not going to be enough of a economic life raft for a lot of these people, and they're going to cast themselves into irrelevancy, which is ultimately what I think a lot of the oligarchy and the lapdogs of the blue cities want, is that they want these people to just boil themselves off and just become irrelevant. Because when we go into the forest and start rubbing sticks together, I mean, it's like, okay, great, we're free, but we're irrelevant. And that's what I worry about for anybody who's a dissident, is that we're just going to take ourselves out of the equation to the point where nobody cares. And we represent a group that is, I think, intelligent and has a lot to contribute to a society that wouldn't punish us every turn of our lives. But we don't live in that society. And so I agree. Screw them, take yourself out of the equation, but they're not going to stop. I mean, they want us gone because we're a threat to their power. And we need to be able to survive and eventually thrive to a point where we can defend ourselves. And we have to do it together. And I don't know if it's sufficient, though, and we might need help from others. And I don't know who that is, but it's basically just all I'm getting at is that individually, I agree with you. Collectively, we have to do more in the long run. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I sympathize, if not completely agree. And it's a profound question. There's a whole debate on Twitter right now about this very question. I mean, it sort of crops up every couple of months.
Like the parallel society thing.
The parallel economy. Do we retreat into the mountains and the countryside, or does that actually just weaken us? Do we give up on the cities? Right, because the cities have been the center of Western civilization for centuries. Do we just give up on the cities?
So it's what happened in Rome. I mean, I don't know if there's any other choice. It's sad, but
we may not have a choice. I mean, we're being driven out. But then there are those conservatives that say, no, you have to fight, and you have to reclaim control. How do you
if you're able to win a battle, that's one thing. But if you're going to lose every time, I mean, it's just a waste of energy. I'm sorry.
It just seems stupid. I mean,
it is stupid.
Sometimes a tactical retreat is necessary.
Absolutely. And what I'm getting at is that because I've lived this. You leave, like, so Yes, tactical retreat. So then what is the question? So you leave the city, and eventually we probably should talk about China. I don't know how much you care about staying on top of it. I enjoy this discussion, by the way, but I'm just
Me too.
wondering, like, if listeners are like, but
You're not getting their money.
this isn't my show, so I have the
China.
freedom
It's
to just
good, it's
talk.
good.
So just
Keep
tell me
listening.
if I'm going off topic. But like, okay, then what? So we leave, and then we've got real isolation. Like, so we show up in a community where nobody knows us. So we hang out with our internet buddies. But, you know, the locals, they don't really know what to make of us. And so you try to make friends, but the problem with the locals in this sort of like hinterland is that they don't get why you left. You're kind of weird to them. And then they don't get the gravity of the situation because they're living in the hinterland. They're not seeing BLM burning things down. They're not seeing. I was looking at this today. There was like a bunch of trains getting robbed, like in LA and Chicago. It's like, why is my Amazon package late? Like, well, you're literally watching people like rip trains apart and like pull things out of the ground. There's cardboard all over the side of the rail tracks, and it's like, this is Mad Max. And but see, these people who are retired and the little rural towns, they have no idea. I mean, it's like talking to your parents. Like they grew up in a different country. So we're isolating ourselves, and we can't really form a coalition too well with these ruralites because they don't get it. They may sort of get some of it, but they're like, oh, well,
They
you know,
know
those
something's
Democrats.
wrong. I mean, from what I can tell in being in Appalachia, they know something's wrong. They can't really put their finger on it, or they
Right.
just want to acknowledge, you know, who's doing it and why they're doing it.
Right.
Yeah,
It's as if
it's
conservatives are
frustrating.
always just reacting. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's true.
Right. I
It's
mean,
true.
it's the madness happens, and then the conservatives call out the madness and the hypocrisy of it, as if anybody cares, right? As if the left really cares about hypocrisy. But it's always reacting to the left. It's like, well, what's Biden going to do next? Or what's Chicago going to do next? What crazy thing is going to happen in LA? Well, okay, but how do we develop a proactive strategy to sort of reconquer this country from these lunatics?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know the answer.
I'm working on it. But I wouldn't hold your breath.
We're
Working
counting
on
on
it.
you. Come on.
All right.
Well,
We
think
need a
about
plan.
it. We're
We'll
talking
talk
about
more off air.
Yeah.
So we're talking about people relocating, this mass migration, and basically these are refugees just with, you know, nicer cars and, you know, some cash. And, you know,
Right.
you move it into these areas now and disrupt local economies. And that's something that I've noticed since relocating, is that there's such a strain now on areas, you know, third, fourth tier cities in, you know, relatively rural and, you know, these exo suburbs. And it's not good because the people that are relocating, a good portion of them have a lot of money. They don't really contribute. They don't work in the local economy. It's like pensioners, people even trading Bitcoin and stuff like that. And in those
Right.
areas, there's not really a good workforce. There's no skilled labor. Telecommunications is a huge problem. You know, water supply, all these things that we take for granted are now obviously being strained.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And the brilliance of a city is that it allows a network of people to work very efficiently. So if you remove yourself from that environment, yes, you can use the internet, but the scalability of isolating yourself is very limiting. And I can just tell you this from experience. It's just not efficient to build anything at scale if your supply chain is spread out through the entire planet, frankly. I mean, if you're doing software, okay, yeah, the Linux kernel was developed through a bunch of telecommuters. Okay, that's software. But if you're doing anything physical, what are you going to do? Build a skyscraper, you know, with a bunch of buddies you met, you know, at the local bar? I mean, you have to have skilled labor, and that's why cities allow these great engineering projects to happen. It's, you know, Chinese cities, going back to our main topic, is like, you know, their middle tier cities are 10 million plus. So they have a huge advantage. And frankly, I'm not optimistic about the West because of this stuff, because we have great people. We are just straitjacketed by a hostile elite.
Yeah.
And it is maddening. And then you have to deal with these midwits who are given power by these elites who think because they listen to NPR, they're smarter than you. And they have the keys to the power to basically, they're just security guards. They've just been given a gun. They're morons, but they get to tell you what to do. That's what's frustrating about this society. And it's terrible. So we cannot scale because we basically are being ostracized from our own countries. So this is what I worry about. And I don't have any easy answers. I mean, it's just a law of physics that, you can't build big things if you're by yourself. Like, you have to work together. So I don't know.
That's always been the issue with conservatives is that I mean, not that I'm necessarily conservative, but people on the right are quite individualistic. And we see this with the right all the time, that there's all this infighting and these various right-wing pundits try to form their own little fiefdoms, and then they fight with other people on the right, whereas the left operates more as a Borg, as like a school of fish that kind of moves in one direction. And that makes them more effective, but it also makes them ultimately less successful, I think, because I mean you can't have real creativity that way. And I see that as the problem with China, as somebody that that lived in China for a number of years. Not that I'm an expert at all, but I mean, China is attempting to kind of stamp out individual creativity and have this kind of unified national response to everything, and that works for them. But that's not the Western way, and I don't approve of that. I don't think we should do that in the U.S., right? And I think it's tragic that, I mean,
I agree.
Right? I mean, just for example, I mean, like, the Chinese government feeds its population a steady diet of imbecilic singing shows and, movies about war with Japan. And that's it. And brilliant filmmakers are suppressed. They're not allowed to be shown in Chinese theaters. I see that as a problem, right? And in the West, in the United States in particular, for all of our flaws, we still do have some degree of freedom of speech and thought. I mean, when you think about, the ascendancy of somebody like Joe Rogan, who, I'm not a huge fan necessarily, but his interview with Robert Malone got 50 million views.
Yep.
Right.
Did you see the one with Brett Weinstein before that? That was the one that I first saw about Robert Malone, and I'm sure he said the same thing on Rogan. But I'm very pro Joe Rogan. People were like, oh, he's just part of like the conservative group. And like, dude, like he's reaching a lot of people. He's doing a lot of good things. Like, just it's fine. Okay, you don't have to agree with everything. I mean, come on, like that's silly.
Yeah. I was a huge Rogan skeptic, but when he started interviewing people like Malone, and he interviewed Alex Berenson, and who else? I mean, he had a number of people on his show that were very, and I think the thing about Rogan is that he really tries to be honest.
I think so.
Not, right? I think so. I mean, and he really engages in debate with people that even he doesn't agree with, and so he performs a very important service. And the thing is, he may be persona non grata among the mainstream media. Who gives a crap? Because he has 50 million views.
Oh, he's bigger than mainstream media.
He's bigger than the mainstream media. That is the mainstream media, right?
That's right.
And we have that going for us, which even many, other Western countries don't have. That degree of freedom of speech. Yeah. And I really value that. And I think a lot of people on the right sort of undervalue that freewheeling aspect of America that sets us apart from many other countries. And they tend to worship, these kind of centralized, dictatorships like China that really, okay, I mean, yes, they do a lot of things right, but they also suppress, free speech, free thought, and all those great things that we value as Western people.
Right. Well, I mean, the question is maybe not how do you describe a utopia, but how do you get something that's better than what we got? And I think the sort of reason people look up to countries like China or Belarus or Russia is that they seem to be able to do things that we'd like to do, but we can't. And we would have to give up things for sure. And frankly, I don't think we could do what they do because they have different demographics, they have different histories, but there are aspects of it that I do admire. And it's, I get what you're saying. And I also share the personal feelings of warmth towards, I guess you can call it classic liberalism of just having free speech and things like that. I cherish that. I miss the actual real debates I used to have in college, although honestly I had better debates in high school because the stakes were less. In college, I was actually very careful about what I said because I went to a school that, well, almost every university in the United States is left of center, let's put it that way. But I thought it'd be very dangerous to be too honest. But in any case, in sort of like the private conversations with intelligent people, I miss that. When I got into the corporate world and left very quickly because of it, I found that these people are completely uninterested in having a good faith debate. And that part I really don't want to lose. And we've lost a lot of that. And that's why Rogan is popular, because he sort of like just talks like a normal person used to. And it's like allowed to be even had like as something you can listen to now, miraculously. I'm actually wondering how long Spotify is going to be able to keep him on. But because I mean, he saw what was happening with YouTube. You know, he's like, all right, I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do here. So that's why he left. But we'll see. I mean, Spotify would be stupid to get rid of him. But in any case, I know what you're saying, and I'll leave it at that.
So how much do you think China is driving the ship right now? I mean, there's something
Ship
has
of what?
something has happened the past 10 years where China's done an about face. It's as if like the West made an agreement with China, decades ago on what you're going to be doing into the future. And you saw this rhetoric, anti-China, come to fruition under Trump, and it really hasn't let up all that much. So I'm just wondering, because now you're seeing what's happening with their real estate, where they're with Evergrande, which is in the news. It's been in the news for the past 6 months. What do you see? Like, what do you reckon is how much is China's behind? Because we've let so many Chinese people into the United States that since the crash in '08. I can tell you from what I can tell in New York City, the influx from mainland China. Whereas, in the past, there were more from Hong Kong. You see what's going on in Vancouver, which I definitely want to get into with you. And we kind of had this, you saw what happened during the COVID lockdowns where we all bought those videos, hook, line, and sinker, of people just dropping on city sidewalks out of nowhere. You saw people, defumigating city streets with trucks and on apartment buildings.
I'd like to think I was skeptical of that. The spraying the cities with, whatever the hell that was, disinfectant. Anyway, go on.
Well, what's your question? You're asking how much is China in charge of their own country? Are you talking about like the global narrative, or what's your question about?
Globalism. Let's just say, because are we in fact, we know we're in bed with China, but at the same time, the past 10 years, there is this animosity from the ruling class about China's growth, and you see what
I think it's very simple. So again, Cold War ends. What are the quote unquote masters of the universe in New York and Washington want to do? Well, they want to take over the world. So they're like, all right, China, you get to be the next manufacturing province of the global system. Join the WTO, World Trade Organization. That was the Clinton thing right before he left. That was like the last thing he did. And then NAFTA was like the precursor to that. So China's smart though, and they play a very close hand. to their vest, and they like to gamble, by the way. So they know a thing or two about cards, but they're like, oh, okay, sure, yeah, we'll do that. So what do? They pursue a very intelligent strategy. Like, okay, if you want to set up your outsource all your manufacturing to us, we'll do that, but you got to let us own half of it, and then you got to let our students come over to your university. So what are they doing? They're stealing all the technology.
Right.
And then they basically rebuilt the entire infrastructure for themselves that they can control. And that was not something that Mexico was going to do, because Mexico's a basket case. So is the United States, by the way. But Mexico, NAFTA was like, oh, we could do with maquiladora factories, no problem. The Mexicans are never going to figure this out for themselves. So let's get the Chinese to do it. I mean, they should have known better with Japan and, sort of Korea, but they tried to do it with China, and it was arrogant and stupid and short-sighted and greedy. But that's Wall Street and our elite for you. So China's like, okay, we'll play ball, pretend to play ball, but they got what they wanted, and so did the West, sort of. I mean, we got high on cheap goods at Walmart, and through the currency reserve system that we have, the world reserve currency, we could sort of have our cake and eat it too for a while. But our middle class got destroyed. And the elites are like, oh, whatever, go to college. You can, do gender studies or something and become a apparatchik in the big cities. Doesn't matter what happens to the Midwest. So China has been playing a very intelligent game. They've gained a tremendous amount of technology, experience, infrastructure through this participation process. But I never think they actually trusted the New World Order Western system. I never. I mean, they still make fun of, or not make fun of us. They still insult us in their movies. They call us, the colonialists, and the century of humiliation. They never shut up about that. I mean, they talk about that with China or Japan too. But it's the same concept of, we're the victim, and we are going to play your game. But you're. And look, I went to school with a lot of kids from China and Taiwan and whatever, and I remember talking to one kid once, and I'm like, you guys must think we're kind of dumb to like let you guys all in here. And he's like, yeah, you're figuring it out. You're figuring it out. They're not dumb.
I'd like to build on that. Sorry to interrupt. But you sparked a memory, which is that I used to teach in China, and one of the things that Chinese students told me repeatedly was that we don't actually care about Western values. So when we were talking about the West, the United States, they would say, well, we really admire the United States because it's wealthy and powerful. Mm-hmm. And we want to be like that. They would never say, well, we admire the Constitution, we admire the First Amendment.
Of course.
No, of course not.
Care less.
And actually, at one point, I was tutoring.
It's so arrogant of Americans to think otherwise. It's just unbelievable how far up their own rear ends Americans are. And I learned this from leaving the country.
Well, you have to leave the country to really get the right perspective on this. I mean, yeah, but at the same time, I mean, the Chinese are also arrogant, because they are utilizing the West for their own benefit, right? Yeah. And they're just a little bit more brutally honest about it if we're willing to listen to them. Yes. I mean, I was tutoring a girl who said something like, she said something to the, I was in her apartment and her father was there, and she said something like, well, I'm not learning English because I love the West. I'm learning English so that I can advance my career.
It's practical, yeah.
Right, it was practical, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's kind of a slap in the face to me. I mean, like I mean, I would never.
Well, I wouldn't say it that way. I mean, why would I learn Chinese? I mean, I guess like actually a lot of Westerners will learn a foreign language because they actually respect the culture. That's true.
Yes. Yes.
Asians aren't like that.
No.
They're different.
Very pragmatic, very materialistic.
They're differently.
They're not afraid to tell you.
They're very materialistic.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, it's a cultural difference, but Americans who haven't lived abroad often have no sense of that, and so they're very naive. And they think, oh, the Chinese come to the U.S. and they're going to experience American culture, and that will change them. Actually, in many cases, it hardens them. It makes them hate.
What do you mean?
Well, in other words, a lot of Chinese come to the U.S. and they'll say things like, well, before I came to the U.S., I admired America.
It doesn't take long. I mean, honestly, like the easiest way is just get on a plane in Shanghai and fly into SFO or LAX, and you tell me which society is more advanced.
And then they're on campus, at some liberal arts university or some, state university, and they're surrounded by the woke nonsense.
Yeah.
Obese Americans everywhere.
It's laughable.
Blue-haired,
It's laughable.
tranny.
It's embarrassing.
It is. It is embarrassing.
Let me ask you this. The Confucia Institute. I wonder what the Confucia Institute has to say about, SJW and wokeism. Adam, I don't know if you're familiar with the Confucia Institute.
A little bit. I know that it's sort of like Radio America or whatever the hell we did in the Cold War. It's their version of it. But the Chinese suck at propaganda. I don't think those things are going to go anywhere. The Russians suck at propaganda too. They're kind of related, I think. And obviously, Russians are Europeans, sort of, but they both went communist. They share a big border, and there's something about the Central or like Asian landmass that produces a certain type of person, and the Chinese movies, for example, that Expat was alluding to. I don't speak Chinese, but I can look at the sort of movie posters and sort of get roughly what they're about, and it's a very blunt way of communicating. There's no nuance. There's no real sophisticated emotional manipulation going on. It's very visual and obvious and kind of basic. And the I forget why I was like bringing this up, but the Confucian Institute. I don't think they're going to really persuade too many Westerners of their way of life. However, well, here's the other thing. It's like, because the West is what it is, Chinese can become Western. But I don't think even the most naive and, well, I would say most of the people that were curious about the Confucian Institute deep down know that they're never going to be actually Chinese. So what is the pitch? Like, I don't know what their goal is. This is me not knowing anything about it, but I'm just assuming they're trying to kind of sort of like build a soft power base in the West with this crap. And it's like, who's it hoodwinking? Like who's actually falling for this?
I don't think very few people are, but it's all about getting compliance. And I think that's how the Chinese have always operated.
Yeah, that's a very Chinese thing to do. Yeah,
so they build these inroads into the West, and there are certain specific issues where you have to toe the Chinese line. So, for example, you have to agree with the Chinese government about the status of Taiwan, or Tibet, or Xinjiang, or else they will punish you diplomatically and economically. And you might think that's kind of a trivial thing, right? Like the U.S. doesn't punish countries because they don't agree with the U.S. about the status of some territory. But for China, that's very important.
Are you sure about that?
Well, okay. So, we punish people about.
Are you really sure about that? Okay, but again, see, the U.S. does it with like very indirect ways. Okay, this is why the U.S. American dream crap works, because people don't realize what's happening. I mean, some people do, but it's very insidious how the U.S. foreign policy works. Anyway, go ahead, please.
So I totally agree with you, and I guess we sort of do this in our own way. But and China wants everybody to bow down to the emperor. They've always regarded the world outside of China as the barbarian territory.
Yeah, good for them.
Right? China is the center of the world. Outside of China are the barbarians. All they care about is that we are obsequious. We pay tribute to the emperor. And that means that we have to, there's certain red line issues.
They'd rather we fear them than love them.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why things like the Confucius Institutes are important. And we started to push back against that because, quite rightly, I think, why should we have a Chinese government-controlled educational institution on college campuses in the U.S. dictating curriculum?
Yep.
Why should we have their spies in our universities?
And the spies, exactly, right? And
i.e. their students.
Their students, also all the Chinese employees at places like Google, Chinese that work for MIT. I mean, they are just
Dude, I was
funneling
roommates with these
knowledge back to
guys.
China.
They're that's exactly what they are. They,
Yeah.
oh, I used to work on the Great Firewall of China.
Well, it's
Now I work
great.
at
How many
Google.
politicians
I know these.
Yeah.
I know these people. It's not fake.
See through
This is exactly what they are doing. And because we
Let-
are so gullible and high trust,
Right.
we're letting them. And again, I was talking to Lamprey about this. It's like I get less angry at the people who are just taking advantage of this because we are letting them do it without even a fight. We're inviting them.
Well,
And
let me interject
Yeah.
here. Bob Dole just passed away, and he was a lobbyist for China. Paulson,
Yeah,
Henry
great.
Paulson, works for a think tank promoting, sustainable development in China. So Madeleine Albright was another lobbyist for China, and then Mitch McConnell's wife's father
Chinese.
owns
Yeah.
a port in China. So
Yeah.
Cocaine. Well,
Yeah.
why do they call him Cocaine Mitch? It's because his wife's family was involved, in shipping, and apparently they were shipping cocaine.
lovely fentanyl, I'm sure.
Great.
Well, right. I mean, yeah, but I agree with Adam here. I mean, I feel deep shame and humiliation that we let them take advantage of us like this, and that's one area where I really agreed with Trump, and I think he
Yeah,
he played a very
absolutely.
valuable role by sort of exposing this and articulating it. That
Yeah.
he actually said, I don't blame China. They're just doing what's in their interest. I blame
I don't
American
either.
elites for letting them do it.
Exactly. And that's what, going back to sort of what Lamprey was saying about, like, is China running the show. I don't know what this shit show is, first of all. I think it's really just a bunch of degenerate, corrupt, Joe Biden's son, writ large, trying to wrest, the pile of cocaine from the next guy. But like, that's the West. And if actually I think the second Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie, like, they actually kind of touch on this. It was set in Hong Kong because that was around the time when they were the British were handing over Hong Kong back to the Chinese, and the love interest is Chinese, of course, and she's like, yeah, you come from a decaying, decadent, degenerate empire, and I'm like, oh yeah, Britain, haha, but like, that's America. I mean, that's like pretty much most of the West with a few exceptions. And it's like, all right, so there's that going on, and then you've got China playing a pretty good game. But where's this all going? I mean,
Well, I want to talk
beats
to you
me.
about,
It's go ahead.
what I was going to talk about is China in the age of globalization. You see China kind of extending its tentacles, One Belt, One Road Initiative, whatever they renamed it recently.
I think that's been a little hyped, actually, but go ahead. I want to learn more about it, actually, but
Well, and then you also see what China's doing in Africa. They're spending hundreds of millions to lay just a few miles of road down in RD Congo. There was a good documentary called Empires.
Have you seen pictures of their surplus male population being exported over there and hooking up with African women?
No.
Yes, of course, absolutely. We were talking
Pictures?
about that. We were talking about that.
I've seen pictures of this. It is the most bizarre thing you've seen. It's like pygmies with like half a like black Chinese kids with like
Wow.
this weird looking Chinese guy you could see like roaming the streets of Shenzhen, in sandals, like, and now he's like found his wife like in Africa. I mean, it is just unreal, this stuff.
That's amazing. I haven't seen that. Pygmies are like 4 feet tall, right?
Well, so are Chinese guys. I mean, some of them at least, but
Fair
So
enough.
the question is why China is able to do all these infrastructure projects around the world. They're trying to hook up with Iran through Pakistan. Yet the U.S. and the West want nothing to do with developing the third world, so to speak. I mean, we do it. What do we do? What do we export? Global training.
We do a little bit, right? I mean, we have tried to counter the One Belt, One Road with our own sort of initiative through Japan. I forget what it was called, but obviously we're spending a lot less money than China. But the thing is, I agree with Adam that it's overhyped because China. I mean, years ago, the media was saying, oh, this is the $1 trillion One Belt, One Road initiative. Well, that's just Chinese propaganda. I mean, that's just what they're promising to spend. They don't actually spend that much money. What they do is they sign these deals with countries where they give loans, right, for development. And of course, these poor third world countries can't pay back those loans. So China might give a fraction of what they committed to give in loans. That country can't pay back the loan, so they default, and then China takes over that project.
Or
Yeah.
gives them more loans. I know that's the case with
Or-
Pakistan. I mean,
Yeah, there was a decent video that I watched about this topic. I'd never heard the term, but I think it was something along the lines of like debt diplomacy or default
Debt
diplomacy.
trap diplomacy.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And basically what you're describing is sort of what the accusation is. And the dude who was like doing the video was basically saying that it's a little bit unfair to China because like they weren't the ones who defaulted, and actually they didn't really get that great of an asset. But the example was, it was something like, I think in Sri Lanka, they had loaned the government a bunch of money to build a port, and it was sort of like a direct rival to the Western-backed ports in Colombo, which is the capital where most of the shipping goes. And they couldn't really attract much business. And so whoever was on the Sri Lankan side basically defaulted, and then China just took it over. But what they got was effectively like a military port, if nothing else. And so it is an interesting concept because they're able to use their money to, and the West does this too. I mean, if you look at the map of the U.S. military's footprint over the world, it's unbelievable. It's just not really talked about in the press as a well, actually, when I wrote my book, I found this really interesting French graphic that was showing how the U.S. has encircled effectively the Soviet Union, and it was sort of like asking the sort of rhetorical question. It's like, well, who's encircling whom?
Right.
But anyway, China's trying to do what it can. But again, like, are they running the ship? I don't know. They're just trying to run their own ship. Number one, they're trying to build what they've never done this before, but they're trying to build a pseudo global empire because I think they view it correctly. And this is actually getting to a debate I've really never resolved with some of my personal friends about globalism as sort of an inevitability. It's like, if you don't go global, again, if you don't scale, if you're just rubbing sticks together in the forest like a dissident podcaster, you're not relevant. You have to have a bigger system and a bigger network to compete. And so I think China's like, all right, well, we've run out of export, growth. We've run out of real estate growth. So now we got to build the Silk Road again. So we're going to take over Asia, Central Asia. And so that's what they're trying to do. Who's going to win? I mean, I don't know.
I'm sorry. What I was going to say is, you do know that their neighbors hate them. So it's
I do.
Yeah. The problem is
That's why they're going into Africa and all these other places that are desperate, because they're not going to get much traction in Vietnam, or, I mean, North Korea barely, talks to them. So it's, yeah, I get that. Yeah.
They have no real allies. I mean, it's kind of incredible. But I agree with you. I think China, I've always found China very hypocritical in the sense that they take advantage of globalization, but then they criticize globalization, right? And they criticize the U.S. It's kind of like, well, so they claim to have this. I'm not articulating this properly, but they defend their own sovereignty, right? But then they want to join these global institutions. They want a seat at the table. They want to be able to dictate rules to the WHO. Yeah. Right, and the World Bank and everything, and it's like, well, all right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they have veto power at the UN.
Right. They veto power at the UN. They obviously value that. They have the Olympics that they spend so much time and effort organizing, so they can have a perfect, representation to the rest of the world. But then they say, well, but we don't actually care what the world thinks. We're just doing our own thing. We're just defending the interests of the Chinese people. I don't think you can have
I saw
it both
this
ways.
in a lot of these Eastern Asian countries, when I visited over there, that because they're so homogenous and insular, and the language barrier and all that, and their sort of media is very inwardly directed, obviously for, you know, just nationalistic slash practical reasons, they really don't understand other countries and cultures.
No,
So
no.
when they communicate to other peoples, especially if it's not like a trained diplomat or somebody who's had a broad experience, like just your provincial Chinaman, like just a provincial American, is going to have no fucking idea what he's talking about. And it's going to come out like just a wet rag, you know, that it's been tossed at somebody. Like the message is not going to be very elegant. And I get that from their like trained spokespeople. I've seen them like being sent out to these like you know, foreign press interviews. They're terrible.
They really are.
They're absolutely awful.
There was a massive Chinese construction company that signed a deal with Canada. And I'm blanking on some of the details here, but basically what happened was that the federal government of Canada rejected the deal because they thought it would it was a Chinese construction company that was going to buy a Canadian construction firm. The Canadian government rejected the deal on national security grounds. The Chinese ambassador to Canada wrote an open letter saying something like, Canada is infested with demons. Racism. Right? And it's like, why would you say that? I mean, it's just such a bizarre thing to say. It's because, just like you said, the Chinese don't understand the outside world. They don't understand how they're perceived. This is what Edward Luttwak referred to as China's strategic autism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a great power, they don't really historically have to think about other countries very much. And
We want their money. I mean, that's one thing I've noted the past 15 years, probably since the crash in 08, is that as soon as the crash in 08 happened, we were just desperate for any type of fresh cash flow, and we allowed a little Chinese horde in to buy up a lot of these, you know, mega city centers.
Yeah, isn't America the only? I could be wrong, but I've heard like it's one of the only countries, if not the only country, that allows visas to be stapled to large quantities of cash for purchases of real estate. And obviously we've seen that in the West Coast, places like Miami as well, but more of that is from Brazilian investors.
Yes.
Russians are all over Miami. But yeah, no, I mean, the United States is a good piece of land because we don't make anything. And we have a massive trade deficit, which I've railed on for years about. Nobody listens. Not that
you and Trump.
People like you would not consider that, you know, important, but you know, the average Amazon clicker has no idea that none of that is made here. Maybe they sort of do now because COVID's forced them to realize that, but we got to pay for it. So what happens? Well, all that money leaves, and the exporting nations are like, well, this is useless because America doesn't make anything other than, you know, airplanes or something. So I can't buy an airplane, or I don't need an airplane, or I don't need that many airplanes. So I got to buy something. So I'm going to buy land because the United States is good piece of real estate because it was populated by a bunch of spread out cave dwellers, basically, or tent dwellers. Like they didn't have anyone here, so it was just this giant empty space, relatively speaking. Obviously there were some indigenous peoples, but it was not populated, so it's still relatively unpopulated. And the Chinese, they're like, and everybody's like, oh man, this is a land grab, I got to get some of this because we live in these bug cities, literally. I'm tired of this crap.
Which is outrageous that we allow that.
And I can't even live in my own apartment.
Same with Australia.
You know, contaminates it. So.
Yeah, Australia, Vancouver. I mean, the Vancouver model was coined by the Australian, whatever their equivalent of the CIA is. Essentially, their intelligence agency coined the term Vancouver model. And if you were to go to, they say New York City is a city that never sleeps. I'm here to tell you, oh, it sleeps. If you look up at night, and you know, expat can, definitely vouch for me on this one. All the buildings are empty. It's just black lights everywhere. And, you know, that wasn't the case 20 years ago.
The residential skyscrapers on Billionaires Row, you know, on what is it, 57th Street or something?
Yep.
That are purchased by Chinese and Russian, oligarchs. They don't actually live there, right? I'd like to actually go back to something Adam said because he mentioned rental yields in China, and I just looked it up. So rental yields are about 2% in China. The
Sounds right. Yeah.
typical mortgage rate is 5.4%. So you're
That's
not
not good.
making money. No, it's not good at all. But the reason that the Chinese buy property is because it's the only investment class that they really trust, and they believe
And they have
that
appreciation too, which can
appreciation.
also,
They think property will constantly appreciate, which is why it's
but
so
you
hard.
can't control that, and that's why it's risky, because if you have a bust, you're going to be underwater real quick.
Well, exactly, which is why the Chinese government has been sort of trying to prop up the real estate. It's so hard for the Chinese government to crack down on real estate speculation for that reason. I mean, they're going to have a lot of angry people on their hands if real estate values fall. 90% of Chinese urban households own their own property, which is crazy. So the idea, like in the US, we have this whole concept of, young people renting a crappy apartment in New York City while they start their career. That doesn't really exist in China. You live with your parents, until you can afford to buy your own apartment, or your parents buy you an apartment, which is usually when you get married, right? And then you move into that apartment. So a lot of Chinese. Okay, and then the other issue is that you can't really invest in the stock market because the stock market is a joke in China. You can't put your money overseas because it's heavily restricted, but people find ways around that. And so that's where you get all this Chinese investment in U.S. property.
Well, let me read some of the numbers here. It's been a decades-long party. Property developers built a debt mountain of $5 trillion. So that's what they're sitting at right now, is $5 trillion in property developer debt. Real estate investment accounted for 15% of the GDP in China between 2011 and 2018. This compares with a 7% share of GDP in the U.S. at its peak of housing boom in 2005. Once related property market activity is added to the Chinese numbers, the proportion of GDP is more like 30%. That sounds a little bit more accurate. So that's just a quick little rundown.
I've heard the 30% figure too, and that includes, I think, it's not just construction, but it includes all the sort of services that go along with it. And I think I was looking at this a couple months ago to try to wrap my head around the economic accounting. What they do is, in the United States at least, there's some, I forget what it's called, but it's like imputed rent or something. It's an accounting concept that gives, in the United States at least, like half of the real estate market is something to do with the fact that you've got this real estate, and if you were to pay the rent on it, even though you might own it or something, that's like counted as GDP. And so I would say of that 30%, maybe 10 to 12%, or maybe 15% if you include commercial and residential, is like construction. But the rest of it is all like the banking and the real estate stuff, and just like that imputed rent thing. But it's a weird accounting thing that you have to do to, I think, properly account for it. But the long and short of it, I would say, is that number is gargantuan and not sustainable, because the amount of construction they're doing. I always forget exactly the numbers, but the problem is the numbers are like different depending on your source. But the rough, like, just intuition here is that they already have in these big cities something like, for at least the middle class, like there's already like three empty apartments for every like family or something, and so that's not needed to have like a fourth, So this is clearly like to boost GDP.
40% of the world's cement and steel is consumed every year in housing alone in China. I mean, this is astronomical. These numbers are huge. I mean, it's crazy.
Wade Shepard made an interesting point. Lamprey sent me an interview with Wade Shepard, who wrote a book about China's ghost cities. And he was sort of defending China on the grounds that, look, I mean, we can criticize China for overbuilding, but what a lot of people don't realize is that the cities that do exist, I mean, China has basically created like 200 or 300 cities in the last 20 years from scratch.
Right, and not only that, they tore everything down from prior to 1949. So any development that predates 1949 is either demolished or actively being demolished.
Everything?
Yeah.
Well, not everything. I mean, the Bund in Shanghai has still been preserved.
They're keeping their sort of historical UNESCO stuff, I'm sure, but the hutongs in Beijing are probably all gone.
Well, all
The
planned
Hutongs, well,
cities.
those are mostly destroyed it like in the 50s and 60s, I think.
Right.
But interestingly, they decided to preserve the European architecture in Shanghai from the colonial period, which I don't quite understand, except that I think it might have been too expensive to tear it down, and it's really beautiful along the river.
Mhm.
But China has created all these cities. I mean, sometimes you miss the target, right? And you create a ghost city where you build it and people don't come. But that's okay if that's only a relatively small percentage of the overall development in China. And as Wade Shepard points out, I mean, they've built something like 60,000 kilometers of highways, 25 to 30,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, 200 to 300 cities, hundreds of new airports, right? Most of which are now inhabited.
I have the numbers here. It's 29,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, 100,000 new highways, 100 new airports, 500 economic free trade zones, and 3,500 what you call urban areas that can house well over 1 million.
I mean, that's astonishing, right? But in recent years, the Chinese government has decided that development for its own sake is not enough. But over the last 20 years, the general sort of governing philosophy has been that, okay, we need to develop as much as possible. So they built this national infrastructure grid, which stretches from east to west in China, all the way to the borders of Kazakhstan and Xinjiang and Mongolia in the north. But there are huge empty spaces within this grid, right? I mean, there are huge rural areas that have no people, right, or very little development. And so China gave carte blanche to the real estate developers to fill in the gaps.
Right.
Right. And those real estate developers include, state-owned companies, private companies, publicly listed companies like in China Wanke or China Evergrande, which is in the news now. And basically, the Chinese government said, look, we'll build the infrastructure, we'll build the hospitals and the university campuses and the government buildings and all that. You can build the apartments. And that worked for a while, right? That arrangement was very suitable for the local Communist Party chiefs of these cities and towns who profited personally and also were able to boost the GDP numbers of the jurisdictions under their control. But in the last couple of years, the Chinese government has said, look, I mean, development for its own sake is not enough. We also need to sort of improve the living standards of the Chinese people. And they've started to crack down on the real estate industry. And we've seen real estate tycoons like Wang Jianlin of Wanda Corporation and now Evergrande, also Anbang Real Estate, which bought a lot of trophy properties overseas.
What's the one I bought the stock in?
You bought.
The Chinese don't even trust their stock market.
Yeah.
No, they don't, and nor should they. What's the stock ticker?
XIN.
Xinyuan.
Okay.
So Xinyuan Real Estate, right?
I
don't know too much about
building
them.
properties in Flushing, Queens. By the way, they were the first Chinese developer to start building in the United States.
That's interesting.
There's apparently some like just empty footprint of a skyscraper in San Francisco, and I don't know if this is still true. I was reading some article about this a while back before we even talked about doing the show, but it was owned by a Chinese development company and
Greenland Group.
Okay, so
I think you're talking. So Greenland had a huge mega project in San Francisco that consisted of like residential and hotel. Yeah, so there have been a lot of I'm not really familiar. I'm not up to date on that project per se, but there have been a lot of failed Chinese projects in the U.S. The same with Wanda Group in Chicago.
Yeah.
And the central government of China has started to crack down on this, and they're saying, look, you're being too ostentatious. We don't need to own trophy properties in the U.S. or Australia or wherever.
Well, it's interesting because I think the Chinese, again, have learned from the Japanese experience. The Japanese did the same thing in the late 80s. They were buying up Rockefeller Center, and it looked bad. I mean, everybody was, like, oh, these people are taking us over. But back then America was still sort of a country, and you could say that like people recognize that as a threat. I mean, you ask the average American today about that, they have no idea, and even if they did, I'm not even sure they'd care. I mean, by the way, TikTok is a Chinese company. Well, whatever. They don't view it the same way. And again, it's sort of like the host is very vulnerable when you have no immune system.
I mean, I think TikTok
right.
is a weapon against, it's a weapon against the American people, and it's just I have no
TikTok
basis on that, but just
Oh, I
my-
totally-
Is it like it's probably like banned in China? I mean, like I know they I don't literally believe that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they like restrict it.
Oh, I
because
don't think TikTok is. Yeah, I don't believe TikTok is legal in China. TikTok also signed the largest
Really.
Manhattan office lease during the COVID era. So, like, I think it was in May of 2020. They were like the first company to sign a major office lease in New York City.
That's right. So did Facebook, was another one.
And Facebook. Yeah, TikTok is certainly a weapon against the U.S., but so is Facebook.
Right.
So, or I mean, I like.
Well,
I
and
neoconservatives.
yeah,
that just
and
attack
what does China do? They block Facebook in China, right? What do? We invite their. I think Trump actually tried to do something, but was it TikTok? I know that
TikTok.
they were looking for like
I think-
an American tech company buyer, I think, for
No,
something
Walmart
like
was
that.
gonna buy it.
Walmart. Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
That was so
Walmart.
weird.
Friend of the people.
So going back to China and the property development, they added 3 red lines. That's what
Right.
the Communist Party rolled out. And basically, there were 12 developers sat down with the party chiefs. And of those 12, there was 2 developers that couldn't meet the 3 red lines. And one of them happened to be the second largest property developer in China, which is Evergrande.
I have the actual 3 red lines in front of me if you want me to
Yeah, please.
summarize that. Okay, so number 1, you need to have a liability to asset ratio of less than 70% or a leverage ratio of 3 to 1. This seems a little bit weird because I remember in our financial crisis, they were talking about in 2008, I should say specifically, they were, so we're still living in a financial crisis in my opinion, but the investment banks, at least, maybe not the commercial banks, but the investment banks were like levered like 30 to 1 back in 2007. So I don't know where they get this 3 to 1, but that's very conservative. Number 2, net debt over equity is less than 100%. And number 3 is $1 of cash for each dollar borrowed short term. I don't know if that's like short term loans, but I guess that would sort of make sense. But that would not work as a developer if that's long-term loans. But in other words, they're very strict on getting loans now, and I think they had to walk that back a little bit. But Evergrande's score was 82%, which was above the 70% limit for number 1. For 2, they were twice as bad as what the limit was, and then for number 3, they were about half what they needed, so they were again short by like 100%.
So now
I don't know what the other
what Evergrande's doing now in order to pay at least some of its debt back. So like they owe money to subcontractors, leasing agents, property managers, and their general suppliers. They're like, okay, we can't pay you back, but we'll give you a parking spot or we'll give you like a studio apartment. And that's basically what Evergrande's doing in the short term right now to keep afloat. They had to give up their property, their headquarters, then moved back to where they originated from because they can't afford they can't even afford the city they're in. So this is pretty crazy.
Oh yes, they moved out from their Shenzhen office back to Guangzhou, I think.
And they got into other ways of generating income. They started doing asset.
Do they still? Is their CEO still the same guy? Because I think the government was basically like doing the perp walk with him and making him pay like the company's debts out of his own pocket or something.
He did do some of that, and we all know, being a Chinese billionaire, friends don't let friends be Chinese billionaires.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the amount of deaths of Chinese billionaires.
I mean, yeah. I'm not really up to speed on Evergrande, but I mean, there were like, yeah, Chinese billionaires have a very pronounced tendency to die or be executed or yeah, or imprisoned for life. China does not really mess around with its billionaires because the Communist Party ultimately does not want any challengers to its power. So, I mean, if you're a billionaire, if you're Jack Ma, if you're Hui Kayan of Evergrande, you have to be really careful. Don't get too big for your britches because the Communist Party may decide that, you're a liability and you need to disappear for a month.
Like in Cambodia, the saying goes for the Cambodia's People's Party, you can enjoy Cambodia as much as you want, just don't enjoy it more than us. I mean, that's their official motto. Like, yeah, sure, you can come here and make money, but at the end of the day, it belongs to us. And if you get a little too uppity, you're going to be in the rice field somewhere.
Yeah,
it's eating you.
Yeah, there's a really great book that sort of explains the logic of the Communist Party, and it's called The Party, The Secret World of China's Communist Rulers by McGregor. I forget his first name. But he just explains how, the Chinese Communist Party has a sort of dual leadership structure where, so every city has a mayor, but then there's a Communist Party chief of that city, right? And the Communist Party chief always has higher status.
Yep.
And this is how it works in a Leninist system. It's very hard for Westerners to understand, but the Communist Party always has higher status than the government itself. As
measured by how hot their wife is? Because that's ultimately the ultimate measure, isn't it?
That's well, and also the license plate on your car. So the Shanghai Party secretary's plate.
Yeah, I like mine.
Well, the wife is probably more important, right? But the Shanghai, CPC chief, their license plate is 00001. The mayor and deputy party communist secretary is 00002.
So that's like the prisoner, literally. It's like,
number one, number
like,
two.
did he ever meet number one? Like, I don't know if you've all seen that, but it's great.
Number one is the big bubble that chases him on the beach.
Yeah, was he number 6 or something? Like, what the hell was?
I forget. That was the 60s. It was sort of before my time.
Yeah. You've seen it though.
I have seen it.
Yeah.
A couple episodes with what's his name, the actor?
Patrick McGowan.
He's great.
He played the warden in Escape from Alcatraz, actually.
Oh, okay.
Fun fact.
All right, yeah. And he was also in The Scanners.
Anyway,
yeah. But
sorry, I derailed you. Go on.
No, you didn't. You actually saved me from sort of an artistic spiral.
Well, you were talking about the party and how much swagger they got, and do they really like take on board that they're basically just the guy with the gun as opposed to the guy who actually like produced something? I mean, because like Russia had this problem where after the George Soros's et al. Went in there and wrecked the place after communism blew up, they kind of took over a lot of that stuff, and their compatriots helped, and they got a big share, but they were rudely awakened when Vladimir Putin took the reins back and basically said, you think your billions are going to save you because I've got polonium or whatever it was that ended up killing a lot of those guys or ostracizing them at the very least. So
yes,
they I don't know what my question is, but it's sort of like it's getting to where's China going. It's so the Russian economy is very still dependent on
non-existent
Oh,
The
what do you
Russian,
mean?
Russian economy. I mean, like the four biggest U.S. cities, GDP like shits all over Russia's
Well,
GDP.
I think the Italian economy, for its
Yep.
Roughly,
gigantic presence, is about as big as Russia's. For a country that is literally the largest country in the world, that's pretty bad. So there's a lot of like, Russian LARPers and the sort of dissident movement. It's like, have you been to Russia? Like, you've seen their infrastructure. There's a reason they lost the Cold War, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, there was a funny. Did you guys ever see Everybody Loves Raymond?
Of course.
Um,
sure.
completely sort of random, it would seem, but the reason I'm bringing it up is the creator of the show is this Jewish guy, but his like family came from Russia, and so he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go visit Russia." And there's this hilarious, I forget what it's called, but it's basically like they're trying to make the Russian version of Everybody Loves Raymond, and it doesn't work because the Russian culture is so weird. But it's like, well, why is this guy like being like made fun of by his wife? The husband needs to be in charge. Like, it was just like the masculine like roles were like wrong. But in any case, the funny part of that documentary was he was just like wandering like this like subterranean like hallway, which used to be like the ministry of like art or something like, and this is where like the entertainment was made in Russia or the Soviet Union. And he's like talking to this guy in this like horrible room where there's like this like giant like rusted like steam vent pipe like going through like the middle of the ceiling. And it's just like, what the f, like this is communism like writ large. Like everything is just decided by the top and nothing makes sense, and it's just this really bizarre country still. And so, when the guy with the gun basically like tells these vulture capitalists that, you guys are raping us, rightly, and I agree with like the instinct to like control those guys, that's fine. But then where do you go? Like, you basically go back to like, steam vents going through the ceiling. Like, military guys like don't know how to run an economy. Like that's like what Chile learned after like Pinochet took over. Or I think it was Allende, actually. It was like right before him, like, because the CIA took that guy out because he was sympathetic to communism or something. But one of the two, like, they had this hilarious like command room, like the Star Trek Enterprise like bridge, where it was like the military guy was going to run the economy, and he had like all these like control dials in front of him, like you would do like on an aircraft carrier or something. It didn't work. Like it just like, you don't tell the steel industry to go that direction. You don't tell the farmers to go in that direction. Make it all orchestrate just from a central room and actually expect it to be super efficient and
Well,
perform well.
Adam, you
I
have
don't
to
think it's
realize a
possible.
lot of countries choose a military dictatorship because that's the only part of their government that actually functions properly. Pakistan is a good example of
Right.
this. Thailand has now been ruled
Yeah.
by the military for almost getting it up there, I think 6 or 7 years now. There's
Right.
other
And,
countries.
and this gets to kind of, this is sort of like lots of things are like happening at once. This is whatever happens when you're talking about like big macro stuff, which makes it very difficult to sort of keep track of all this stuff. But these are all like related things where, why is Pakistan relying on their military? Well, because they have a very low trust, dysfunctional population. And the military is basically, it's a very simple organization that has a chain of command that follows instructions. And when you are starving, you look to people like that because they can get you the basics. Problem with them is that they can't get past that. Like, they're too stuck in, oh, well, my commander didn't tell me to turn left, and so I have to turn right. I'm sorry, I can't turn left. Like, if you ever talk to the guy who like was in the military, you just can't get him to think outside the box unless he's been dishonorably discharged or something, or is in prison. But it's like, that doesn't work for an advanced economy. That's kind of what I'm getting at with this
Yeah.
China thing. It's like, if the Xi emperor is going to basically clamp down on everything, not that the Chinese were really wowing us with their innovation, but this is going to make it even like worse, because they're going back to some of the old ways where it's going to be more centrally planned. And a lot of the growth, for as maybe undistributed as it may have been amongst all the population, the contrast is clear when you go from communism to socialism with Chinese characteristics / capitalism, which is when the Chinese economy took off. And if they're going to clamp down on this stuff, where does that take China? That's really what I'm getting at with this like long rambling sort of soliloquy on the whole
Right.
macro economy. I'm curious
Who
what you
knows?
guys think.
Who knows? I mean, a city-state like Singapore can potentially control their economy
Because it's
successfully.
simple, or much simpler.
Right,
It's small.
I mean, it's only,
Yeah.
a few million people, right?
Right.
I don't think you can centrally control an economy of 1.4 billion people. I don't think it's possible.
Empirically, you couldn't. It didn't work. I mean, they were starving to death by them
I-
like tens of millions when they tried.
Well, right,
And-
and I mean now they're trying a different way of doing it. I mean, it's still sort of centrally controlled. I mean, the big banks are controlled by the central
Right.
government.
Right.
All the major industries are controlled. Internet industries are controlled, right? I mean, as an American, you cannot.
I would say
invest in
they're regulated, but they're not dictated to on the sort
No,
of
they're
like
monopolized.
tactical.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're state owned. They're state owned.
Right.
Well,
Which is a little different than
They're not state owned.
Gosplan telling you your production targets. So they do
Right.
have, I think,
They're not
some of
doing
that, but it's not literally like you are not allowed to decide anything without our approval. It's more like you have rough guidelines,
Right.
and if you're not
Exactly.
meeting those, you will be removed and replaced. But I think that's
Exactly.
kind of how corporations work, frankly, and that's sort of a working model that can work. But the difference is the West, I mean, it's getting more like this, but the West is not like one overwhelming umbrella of everything. And what that does is it sort of stifles the innovation, competition, whatever you want to call it. It is a thing. I mean, it has advantages too when you have to like go in one direction, like in war planning. I mean, you don't want to have like competing like, armies within your own country, but like you have to go in a direction. But
Adam,
over a long period.
what about perfect competition? What do you know about that?
Well, yeah, my pseudonym is Adam Smith, right? So I guess that's why you're asking me.
Well, no, I've heard you discuss the concept
You
of
work in a pin factory, perchance?
Yeah. No,
I
I was the guy with the clipboard.
I heard you
didn't actually
discuss
work there.
on a previous episode you did about perfect competition, where basically you can't tell the difference between like Target and Walmart, right? Or one supermarket from another. And I just wanted your opinion on that.
Well, that's sort of like an oligarchy. I mean, obviously, maybe that's what you're getting at, but it's not. It's not perfect competition.
It's like as if we've turned into somewhat of this communist state without realizing it. So, like cars, for example, now they're all not going to make gas-powered engines anymore. They have these certain target dates, 2025, 2035, 2040. But you see, Ford does what GM does. The displacement.
Some of that though is competition because take cars for example. Tesla has basically just shown these traditional automakers to be completely incapable of making any real technological advances, and so they're having to do that because they can't compete otherwise. I don't think it's basically they're all cooperating so much as effectively like trying to catch up, and the sort of model has been made more clear to them. However, I do think there is sort of this culture of consensus where what's good for you is good for me, and let's not rock the boat. I'm sure the CEOs work that way. Why wouldn't they?
You look who the shareholders are for some of these public traded companies. It's Vanguard owns Target and has a stake in its competitor.
Well, look at Vanguard, State Street and BlackRock, and the inordinate influence that they have over corporate America. We're not too different from China in that respect.
Yeah, in that way, I agree. I would say the political, the military, the political is much weaker, though. It's really taking its orders from the capital holders, and this has been the classic critique of the communist world, of capitalist nations. It's like, well, you guys are just run by guys wearing top hats. I mean, that was the caricature that they would paint, and that was true, 150 years ago, literally. But now, these guys are just wearing like Patagonia vests and weird looking shoes at Davos. I mean, that's the only difference. But yeah, it's a tech oligarchy and it's a finance oligarchy for sure. Yeah, and the pharmaceutical one, because I don't understand as much about that industry. I know more about the tech and finance stuff, but and general manufacturing, but I've never really been a biology guy, and so I get that these pharma companies are minting money, and it sort of begs the question why I didn't pay more attention to it, because the fact is the United States spends 20% of its GDP on healthcare, and so obviously that's a huge component of who controls things, for damn sure. I mean, the Obamacare thing, which is supposed to control the costs, it didn't make any material change as far as I could tell in terms of the gross over expenditure in the healthcare sector in the United States. So I think those guys too are important, with COVID especially. It's becoming more clear.
Well, let me ask you, what do you, let's get into real estate in the United States now. I mean, so there's this mass internal migration. Cities are being hollowed out, sorry. What's your prediction for future cities? I mean, they're being destroyed. And I think that, go on.
I agree that they are, and it's tragic. However, I've wondered if this isn't sort of planned as sort of a blockbusting strategy to ruin these places. They did it in the 70s. I mean, 60s, 70s, like with slaughter cities, if you talk to EMJ about that. And then you build it back up, buy it cheap, redevelop it. That's what Trump did, for a lot of New York. And you get rich. I don't see how the cities as a model go away, because they're just too good of a technology. Why they're doing this is sort of open question, but I think ultimately you're not going to lose the cities forever, because they're just too important to any society to have. And there's going to be enough powerful people that get that, and they're going to want to build their infrastructure in a place like that, maybe in a different place, or the existing ones, but they're going to be cities in the future. I have no doubt about that. It's just a matter of like where, how, when, and who controls it. That's all I have to say.
The objective is to kind of hoard us into these huge behavioral sinks. I still hold on to that theory. And just based on
you mean like Agenda 21, like, or it's 2030 now, but absolutely, like just having people in a pod, or because I mean the sort of opposite is happening with like this, like pushing out of the city, but doing it in a way that you're still in the matrix, but you're just doing it in your like exurb house. It's not literally in like a dense urban place, but expand what you see.
It's expanding. I can tell you that. I mean, being in, New York and just learning about the markets. I mean, this is stuff the Tea Party used to be crying about back in 2009, 2010. It's coming to fruition. There's no doubt about it. Now, as far as you could just see
the Tea Party was talking about this. I thought those guys were like whining about taxes or something.
No,
they were talking about Agenda 21.
They were totally talking about Agenda 21. I remember it clearly because that was kind of my red pilling. And
they got infiltrated.
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly what happened to them.
Whoever took over that thing.
Yeah, well, they became a bit of a standing joke, but they were talking about a lot of these type of, mixed use, walkability. I mean, stuff like that, and that's just creeping. It's been creeping all across the United States for over 10 years, and now you're seeing it come to fruition one way or another. And I do think COVID and, the apparatuses, the organs to Sustainable Development Agenda 21, they still have the same endpoint with one another, which is more mass surveillance, more security. I mean, the city's ideal to control people, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, but your question was about like what is the sort of physical layout, I think, going to look like? That's at least what I thought you were asking. And I'm not sure, but I think eventually we're going to have a return to the cities. But I think again, like it helps to just brainstorm as like put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Like, what would you do if you were an oligarch? Like I don't know if it was before the show or after the show, I can't remember, but like I wouldn't trust democracy either if I were them. And it makes sense that they're trying to corral the potential threat to their power into these very controllable stockyards. And it makes sense to bust up the paradigm so they can build back better. Well, what does better mean? Well, that means they just have a better control system on it. And it just makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you do that if you were
United States? I think that's what I call it, the subscription-based boutique economy with the Taco Bell infrastructure.
All right, that's good. That's part of it. I mean, I think being a renter on everything, I think, is definitely a business model that any business would prefer. It's like software as a service versus CDs at CompUSA. It's definitely preferable. So, you can do that for rent. You can do that for your car. You could do that for whatever other big expenditure there is. Healthcare,
Well, I want to also get into a little bit about, China's basically mimicry, simulacrum of America and Europe.
Yeah.
All these various projects that resemble something in, Venice or London, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, what is there to say? It's just the sort of pattern of Chinese people for the past 1,000 years. Like they're really good copiers. I don't know why they find that so compelling because you sent me that book. I tried to grasp the main concepts there, and there is some like embarrassment, I think, in the West for that type of behavior that doesn't seem to exist in the East, or at least in China. I don't think that's as common in Japan and Korea, nor is it in Southeast Asia. It's just like the Chinese, like they like to have like other people's stuff. I don't know. It's very alien to my brain and how that's appealing.
When they come to the United States, they'll take on names that are associated with Caucasian people or West,
yes,
Brittany,
for example,
Alexis, and sometimes they'll go out of the way and dye their own hair and such. And it was really disturbing how they it's like a novelty to them. And they build these apartments and these villas, that on the outside look like something that you would see in America or Europe, and then you go inside, it's totally Chinese inside with these ranges for woks, and they'll knock down doorways to meet a specific style and so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, so. You guys ever seen the Nazi bars in like Korea? There's like this hilarious it's fun, I guess, because they don't have any of that in their own culture. It's such a monolithic, homogenous society. When they do copy it, it is kind of like a sort of really unnuanced core understanding of what they're doing because they do it from visual perception, not actually lived experience or
part of the
really a fluidic like interaction. But go ahead.
Yeah, one of the reasons why they do it, and this is something that I got out of this reading and researching this. One is the Communist Party doesn't again have ability to be creative, right? That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is they're in such a tight bind. They have to build something within 2 years in many cases, right? So they have no idea they have no idea how to come up with something original. So they just, take a bunch of pictures of some city square in Austria and then just replicate it because they just don't have the ability or know-how or have the time to be creative.
That makes some sense. Like they're just under the gun to produce so quickly that they're like, well, I got to make something. So the easiest way to do it is just copy, and that makes that's probably a lot of it. But obviously, we've all seen Chinese behavior and copying things. Like they're good at that, and reverse engineering. And then also just I think part of it is too. It's like the kid that grew up poor, and sort of like you see like how these rappers behave when they get rich. Like they want to like just ostentatiously show off every supercar, every house, whatever. And it's not like they didn't grow up with it, so they don't have any taste. I think there is just a human aspect to that because I think they do feel like they're coming from a place where they were poor,
Right.
and they want to show that they're not. So I can empathize a little bit with that.
Yeah, then what they'll do is buy into neighborhoods in the United States and Canada that sound fancy. So they'll buy in Vancouver, there's a suburb called Richmond. Well, it sounds like rich man, so they buy into that location. In New York, it would be White Stone, like, ooh, fancy. So they'll do things like that.
Yeah, I mean that happens in America too. I mean, if you look at these planned development communities, I mean they always have marketing that hits on similar notes. But we're coming from a different socioeconomic history, so I think the contrast is less insane here. Whereas they're literally like walking off of some beaten down rice paddy that's been farmed for 4,000 years, and there's no nutrients left, and so they're like, oh man, like getting off of this, like I just want to consume, I want to do this, and it's like, yeah, it's very exciting, I'm sure.
Would be
A lot of
bringing
them
up
do
rice
this.
paddy fields. The communist parties put like huge blocks, not blocks, but basically you can't develop any more paddy field because they've now over leveraged themselves with just destroying their agricultural farmlands. Building these cityscapes.
Oh, okay, so they're trying to protect the agricultural land
What's
from
left of
further.
it.
Yeah, I know that just high level they make most of their food in the coastal regions, but that's where the real estate development is too. So I don't know where they're getting their food now.
And the majority of the tax revenue is based off on these developments by selling, blocks of
Right.
land. They don't have an annual property tax. It's just one shot during the purchase price.
Yeah. Expat, you still there?
I don't think he is. He disappeared. Well, listen,
I was going to ask him a question. Go ahead.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. There you go.
All right.
Were you hearing us discuss these construction projects and paddy fields?
Yes. Yes, I was.
Yeah, I've only been to China a couple times, but I saw some of that construction blitz, and I don't know when the last time you were there, but what was your read on like how that works? How the sort of provincial mayors or whatever are motivated to do that construction? Is that going to continue? What are the dynamics behind that?
I'll have to tell you about that later. I'm not feeling quite well right now. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
No worries, man. Well, Rick, can you repeat that question one more time? Maybe I'll try taking a swing at it.
I'm just curious, what's the ground level incentives? What's going to be happening going forward now that they're sort of slowing down that growth model of having construction? That's the big question. It's like, okay, they ran out of export growth. They're probably correctly saying that their construction growth is unsustainable, so they're trying to slow down. So what's going to be next? What is
demographics? I think that's the one key
having children?
on all this is that China is going to look like where Japan is now in another 20 years, maybe sooner.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I think Xi has to make some type of pitch towards a young because they're going to want property. And he's also very gung ho about, kind of getting the birth rate numbers up. I think he rolled back one shot.
Yeah, all of the Eastern Asian countries have tried. I will be curious to see if they succeed with that, but the other countries have not been able to be successful.
Well, he's got to do something for the young to get into property. Unfortunately for us in the West,
Well, how about they get rid of their skewed abortion rates in favor of men? I mean, that it just dooms, a large portion of the men, frankly, who end up being born because there's not enough women for them. That one was always idiotic to me. I know it's like, oh, historically we have to give, the son the next, empire of our family, but when everybody's doing that, I mean, it's just a horribly skewed sex ratio. I don't know if they've ever addressed that, but that one that's like a no-brainer.
Well, you can see he's attacking the men, so he takes their pornos and video games away, but he's not addressing, the elephant in the room, which is female.
Did you? Yeah. Well, I mean, females are just responding to their environment. I don't put the agency as much on them. It's really just the people in charge that are designing the environment for those weak men to have limited options. Did you talk to Devlin? I can't remember if you interviewed him about his book. You're familiar with like Sexual Utopia and Power? I think it's his book title.
It's a pretty good book. I've read it.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is his sort of explanation for why he wrote it was that the stuff that he was hearing from the conservative right was that, men need to man up, and, it's men's fault that women are not being, it's men's fault that they're falling into feminism or the family's breaking up. Men need to step up and provide even harder, and, she won't leave you if you do that. And he was basically saying, like, okay, sure, that'll help, but what's really going on here is sort of a deeper biological phenomenon, and it's not all of the men's fault. Maybe individually, yeah, like you tell the guy to do what he can, but on a policy level, there's something bigger going on here, and it's basically that women are hypergamous. They go for men that are higher in status than themselves. And if you have an open sexual marketplace where you don't have to marry people in order to have sex with them, women are going to have relationships with only the top men because that's whom they prefer. And I don't think I highly doubt this discussion is as beaten to death as it is in the West. But you'd think that the Chinese leadership, given how intelligent they are, they would recognize some of this. And I'm surprised that they're blaming men for basically like, hey, guess what? I can't think of a Chinese first name. Like, let's just call him Feng or something like that. I don't know. But hey, you over there. And I don't know. One of the times I went to China, like there's like this weird like alleyway culture of like pool table players wearing leather jackets. Like these guys have no prospects. You can just tell by looking at them. They're kind of beaten down day laborers, and they're playing pool at night with each other because that's their friend group. But you're gonna yell at him for not having a wife. I mean, I guess, sure, you want to encourage men to be strong. I encourage that. I try to do that myself. But when there are twice as many guys, and I know it's not extreme that extreme, but just think of it that way, just to make an argument here. If there's twice as many guys as there are women, and there are more men than women in China, inevitably you're going to have some guys that don't have a wife. And I don't know how they can blame those guys for that. Like it's absurd. So maybe there's more nuance to it than I understand. But
about 10 years ago, there was a huge a bit of a scandal, if you want to call it, where a young woman, there was a dating like show, where you pick three guys and they each try to woo the woman and stuff. And the guy punted the question, would you like to go on a bicycle ride with me, like into the, out into the woods or something like that? And she responded, I would rather cry in a BMW than smile on a bicycle. And there was a huge, again, it was outrage. The public was totally outraged. And you see now with Xi Jinping, Winnie the Pooh, he's realized how decadent and debaucherous a lot of this, consumerist culture is. And I find that he's a little bit more of an old school communist, and the people are reacting well to it.
Well, that's good. I was expecting you to say something like he's old school, like these kind of like guys that F. Roger Devlin was seeing in his like Republican hangouts or something, where they're kind of like the old lion Republican alpha males who have wives and they can't relate to why their son can't get a wife, kind of thing.
Yes.
But if he's able to sort of see beyond that, that's good. But I'm not sure what you're saying here.
No, what I'm saying is that they're trying. China's trying to counter a lot of this hypergamous behavior. I do see that's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction given the state of the world. Is, for example,
what are they doing though? Like, okay, it's one thing to recognize it, which is you need to do that first. But what are they doing to limit hypergamy in specifics? Because I've only seen stuff that is like limiting
the values more or less in indirect ways.
Okay.
Like again, they're not really good on the propaganda. But
right.
There seems to be a bit of a reaction towards Western. I mean, think about it. If you went to high school in China and you learned about Marxists and stuff like that, then you get out in the real world and realize, like, oh my God, you're the total opposite from what I was, being brainwashed into thinking was great. So I think there's the young demographic does realize a lot of the hypocrisy coming from their ruling class. Same as us in the United States. And, one thing I've taken away when researching this topic is that a lot of the problems in China are very similar to that in the United States. I mean, they're also having problems, as far as men-women relations go. They have a real estate problem just like how we do in the United States. And a lot of the young people do not necessarily carry the same characteristics as their parents or grandparents.
Right.
So you're not going to see them basically have their teeth rotten out of their face and chain smoking and gambling and getting wasted. So they seem to be much more empathetic than their parents.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my general vibe from them.
What do you think the next 100 years, and that's an absurd question, obviously, but like, what do you think the general direction of the world is going to be? Is there going to be national entities still for power, or is it just going to unify into this globalist system?
California global. That's what I think, because they're not learning from their mistakes. They roll something grandiose out.
So the majority of the population is going to be a vast underclass living in these dysfunctional cities, populated by a urban elite that controls everything.
Yeah, basically, it doesn't seem like anything's going to change. I could be wrong. There could be a black swan event, but what COVID did, it was an accelerant, and it basically got us further along to what their long-term agenda is, where these coastal elites flying on private jets and helicopters, and we'll just be descending into like neo-feudalism. A lot of like Joel Kotkin's work. Joel Kotkin.
That sounds familiar, but I don't know too much.
He's got a really good book called The Human City, Urbanism for the Rest of Us. He wrote it about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I think his
as sort of like an idyllic alternative, or this is his forecast for what's actually going to happen.
Well, it's basically what is happening. I wouldn't necessarily say it as a forecast, but the general direction for at least the past 30 years is that kind of want us all living in like these what are supposed to be nice looking flavas, where, you bicycle and you be a sodomite on a bike, and there's the Pilates studios, and they just hollow out the industrial capacity of the United States. I mean, it's
Well, like, what is your thought on the? I don't know if antinatalist is the right way to put it, but I would say the general sort of like opposite of what China's trying to do, but it's sort of in the Western culture, it's like, abortions for all, and
yeah, they're trying to kill us.
get married when you're ready in your 40s, and it's like, oh, dude, like this is not going to create children.
What's your culture? I mean, the churches have abandoned you. You got nothing. The gay bar is what you got.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the new religion. Is climate change, veganism. People have their own little bubbles, their own little individualistic. We're doing this chat. People are doing their own thing. There's no solidarity. People listen to all different types of music. It's really sad when you're in the car with your friend. You can't agree on a song to play. Like a song will play for 15, 20 seconds and they change the song. Like
We're just spoiled for choice.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
I think that's a big part of it.
But I am disappointed in a lot of like churches. I mean, they could have capitalized on social media. They never did. They could have started their own thing. I mean, Trump, when he was in office.
It's interesting you bring up churches, but finish your thought, and then I'd like to talk about that.
Well, I was going to say, like, in regards to Trump, like, he could have got off Twitter early on. We knew that was going to happen. It felt like so staged. Like, it's just downright sad. Go on.
So, I've dabbled in organized religion. Not that I really felt at home there, but I was sort of searching for a structure that would be something constructive for family formation / moral development / community development. And I am sad to say that I have been very disappointed in what I've seen. Not to say that the people who go to church I have anything against, or that I think they're fools, or that, you need to be an atheist or you're dumb or something. It's just that I don't see the value being delivered to the people who attend in the areas that matter the most. I would say it's most cynically, I would view churches as basically just a self-perpetuating business that are looking to fill seats and collect donations. Less cynically, I would view them as kind of like a very antiquated and frankly uncompetitive and outdated cultural technology that just doesn't work when you have the internet, and they're basically telling very easily disproven falsehoods to people that make no sense, have no bearing on their lives, and it's really about just making them feel comfortable with a possibility of like not dying, but feeling like they will live on forever. It's kind of like you're selling them hopium. What I wanted to see more of was obviously more development around, and there's some churches that do this, like Mormons do this, but I'm not a Mormon. Like, I don't believe their stuff, and I've met plenty of Mormons that tell me they don't believe it either. It's just a cultural thing. But what I wanted to see more of, though, was a focus on the family, a recognition that a strong father is an asset to the family, not a liability, and having a woman that in some departments is in charge, like, the kids, but in other areas is not in charge, is actually a feature, not a bug. That would be the traditional Christian family unit that doesn't seem to be promoted as much or at all anymore in these churches. They're pretty much liberal now, and they promote women pastors. They promote some of them promote homosexuality, and they all seem to promote giving money to Africa and bringing in refugees. And so when I saw that, I was just like, I'm out. You're not helping me, my people. You're not helping anything I care about. You're not addressing the issues men have in attracting a mate. You're telling the man to be less so she can be more. You're not telling him you need to be attractive for her to be interested in you, and you also need to control her nature so that you don't lose the mother of your children and break up the family. They don't seem to get this stuff. It's sort of like going back to F. Roger Devlin, like the pastor will blame the man for the woman wanting a divorce. And it's like, dude, like you need to support him a little bit too, and that if he's doing everything he should be doing, like trying to provide and protect the family, you need to back him up and tell her to back down because she's being selfish because she saw uh, Sarah Jessica, whatever her stupid name is on Sex and the City, and she wanted that lifestyle. Well, that's not good for the family. Like that's the stuff that I was looking for, and I don't see it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the church?
Did you ever read Five Stages of Collapse by Dmitry Orlov?
I've read some of his work, but not that one.
So I somewhat agree with him. When at least the system collapse, people are going to fall back on organized religion, and that's
maybe.
Well, if you look at Russia, for example.
Isn't it kind of too late at that point? Like, well, what do you? I mean, honestly, I don't actually trust that guy. I think he actually has a very anti-Western bias.
He does. You're right.
He really has it out for the West, and I'm like, okay, man, like I don't have anything against you, but you don't have to like insult me every time like you talk about America. Like,
you're
anyway,
100% correct on.
Go ahead.
But I do think that if you look at Russia, for example. And I don't think he mentioned this in the book, but it's just my own personal observation. Russia picked its pieces up basically where communism started. So it was 1905 Russia. They're just, they just took a huge long pause from their history with communism and just picked up the pieces where they last left off, 70, 80 years prior.
So you're saying that that's like a model to
it's one
to use, like,
I mean,
but you have to wait for starvation in the streets. I mean, I'd rather not do that. I've said this before, like the accelerationist camp, I get it. Like if you got nothing to lose, I get it. But what if you do, and what if actually you'd like to not live in a perpetual state of anarchy and garbage, literally? You need to go forward from that. And my fear is that if you invite the destruction without having the ability to capitalize on the opportunities that presents, you're basically just going to make yourself in an even weaker position. Because I think what happened in Russia was that once the Soviet Union collapsed, the oligarchy developed out of the remnants, and those people were the most highly intelligent, vicious, connected people. That was not the mass peasantry. So you saw a mass or mass concentration of wealth and a de-distribution of it in the favor of the ultra powerful. And sure, Putin reversed some of that, but I don't think it was the church that did that. Like he supports the church, but the church didn't like create Putin. I mean, like I'm not sure what your argument is here.
He's capitalizing on that. He's using that as kind of like a cloak to, push somewhat of an authoritarian measure on its people, whether you think China's based or not. I think Putin does at least care about his people in comparison.
I do. I agree with that. That's a rarity amongst our elite, but I've always admired that about him. I do think that's a genuine feeling that he has for Russia and Russians. But going back to the church thing, so what's Orlov's thesis exactly? It's like the appeal of a church will increase in a state of collapse. I mean, sure, but again, it's like, okay, well, my goal is not to have more church. My goal is to have a better society, and if church can help that, good. But collapse is not good. So,
well, you have
like, what's his goal here? Like,
the problem is in the United States, you're not discriminating, like straight up. I mean, this whole mass migration thing. Look what's going on in Idaho, for example. You look what's happening to the South.
What be specific about Idaho and the South? What do you mean?
Well, you have all these people from California moving into.
Oh, okay.
Relocating. So that's not a good thing. So you're gonna basically ruin.
Well, okay, but this sort of gets to my point. This is what happens when we're living in sort of a slow motion collapse. So who's taking the most advantage of it? Well, the people who have the power and the money. So they're basically taking these regions because just like in Russia, like they took the the nickel industry or the oil industry, whatever. I mean, the powerful people are not going to go away in a collapse. They're going to be actually the most capable still, and they're going to take advantage of it. So
Right.
I don't know if I'm sort of, I don't think we're contradicting each other. I'm just sort of adding on to your point here.
Yeah, of course. No, you're 100% right on that. The problem, these, they can fly from Singapore to Hong Kong, down to Sydney, Australia. The whole world is just their playground at this point.
Well, yeah, and so again, the question is, what do you do? I mean, I don't see how a North Korea model competes against globalism, unfortunately, because I'm a nationalist. Like I don't like living in this like ridiculous global homo stuff. It's boring, it's demoralizing, and sure as hell is not my path to glory, because I'm just one of billions and I don't have a seat at the table. And this is the story for most people. So you have a better chance of getting a seat at the table in a smaller country. That's the main reason nationalism is appealing to most people. But what do you do as a small nation when the rest of the world is operating as a unified entity that views your rhetoric as a threat to it, which it is, and then sets out to destroy you? I mean, that's what they did in North Korea, Iran. They're doing it to China. So how do you compete against that? I mean, we don't even have a border. I mean, we don't have anything. Like we're just a bunch of dudes with microphones. So I mean, like, what the hell do we do? It's like, it's a joke. I mean,
Well, definitely definitely relocating. I mean, if you're still like in like a serious blue.
yeah. I agree with that. I'm saying like individually, sure, you can like jump ship, but I want more for our people than that. Like, come on, And I'm not saying you're not wanting that too, but that's the hard question to answer here.
Sorry, you did say that you don't want to accelerate things, and I respect that. I totally get it. But
I need to qualify that. I don't say accelerationism is bad outright. What I say is accelerationism without the ability to capitalize on where that leads is bad. And I think that's the second part, is where we're at right now. I don't think we're in the position to gain more power if we see a further collapse or a faster collapse of our society, because we don't have any means other than violence, which I'm not going to advocate for here. But even if you were to do that, we're not organized. We can't organize, and the technology today would prohibit us from organizing. So I think you got to be careful before you hit that button. And
it's not going to swing in your favor. It's not always
well, it's like hey man, like this goddamn like army or country across the border sucks, man. Like we're getting controlled and bullied by this nation across the. I mean, obviously it's not literally like a border now, but this is the historical case. You had actually a tribe or something, and there was this neighboring tribe that was beating you up or demanding tribute or whatever. And you're the Gauls or whatever, and you're looking and you're wearing like bear skins, and you've got a bunch of sticks in your hand, and you're looking at Rome, and they've got metal armor with catapults, and you're like, you know what? Screw Rome, let's attack. Who's gonna win? Okay, Caesar won. That's stupid. Okay, what you do is you invade like the Germans did when Rome was weak. And yeah, our empire is falling apart, but they're not that weak. So I'm trying to make analogies here, but it's like you got to be smart about your timing on this. There's no guarantee we're going to win, and frankly, there's a high likelihood we won't, because we're not winning now. So that's all I'm saying. I get the argument, but you got to have the right odds in your favor. So, and I haven't seen anybody even attempt to do that math. Like they're not even like trying. They're assuming without any evidence that, oh, we'll just
Aren't
blow it
they?
up. Where's your historical evidence that this is going to be working? Like, sure, like Mao, like, okay, he blew up China, but what had happened right before that? Okay, World War II. Okay,
Right.
well, we don't have that. The World War II is what broke Japan's occupation of China. Well, where's our war? We're fighting ourselves right now.
Let me ask you, what do you think of the whole situation in Ukraine?
I don't have much of an opinion because I think honestly, it's a distraction for an American to be worried about that. I mean, simple analysis without really being an expert is that it's just more empire bullshit that is trying to distract us, trying to advance some bullshit agenda that benefits the few. It's to poke the bear, the Russian bear, of course. I don't think it has any strategic importance to America at all. I think there's, again, it's more military industrial complex, Zionist crap that doesn't benefit Americans, that has nothing to do with us. It's none of my business, really. I don't give a shit, frankly, one way or the other, what happens to Ukraine. I don't know. What do you think? I mean,
No, I see a lot of,
and I'm not saying the question's bad. I'm frustrated that like this is even something that we have to like know about. It's like we have real issues, not across the planet, that we're supposed to be geopolitical experts on when our own locomotives are getting derailed and the boxcars getting ripped off by black people in Los Angeles. I mean, like that's a problem. Like
that is
fix
some
that.
third world shit, man. That really is third world status.
It's so friggin' ridiculous, and it's like this is why China's beating us, and it's all our fault because like China is good, but like we're better if we can get out of our own friggin' way. It's like you're reading the comments on Twitter about this, and they're like, oh man, yeah, like this is what happens in capitalism. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like capitalism has been around for hundreds of years. This didn't just happen like throughout the history of capitalism. It happened when our stupid politically correct culture can't name the root cause of this, which is basically the media gives black people a psychological and legal pass to do whatever the hell they want. It blocks the police from enforcing laws that are set up to basically stop this kind of crap. And then they go and do what, is in their best interest, is basically robbing stuff with no consequences. And the stupid idiots on Twitter are like, oh yeah, this is capitalism, or this is what happens when Democrats run things. It's like, no, dude, you can't call out the actual problem. Every single person on there is black. Every single one. Call it out for what it is. And some, good black people are like, oh man, like this is like, niggas like behaving like niggers, and it's like, okay, well, this is what actually, you could say that in the 50s, the 60s, and then, you know what happened, but you could say that in this country and that stuff would be stopped. You can't say that anymore. That's why it's happening. And, the problem is the idiots in this country, because they've been brainwashed, can't call out why the root cause of everything that's going wrong is happening. It's not even black people's fault. It's just like they're given this pass by our greatest allies. We know who they are because it destroys their greatest opposition, which is the Gentiles. So, and you can't explain that to most people because they don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like they're, what are you talking about? Why is this, that escalated, man? Like what, Godwin's law. Why is this Nazi talking? It's like, dude, I don't give a shit about 1930s Germany at this point. I care about my country. But the reason we have been giving political correctness is because the Frankfurt School was so paranoid after World War II that they saw America as their next threat. And they got rid of, people like Charles Lindbergh, who correctly identified why we even went to that war in the first place. And they stole his kid, and they got him out of the America First race, and then we went to war. And then everything has been friggin' downhill from there. But it's like there's so much to unpack from the befuddled brain of the American that it's overwhelming how bad the propaganda con job is on these people. And it's not even Americans' fault because we've just been growing up in this propaganda soup our entire lives. And it's the miracle of the internet that we've figured out any of this. But that's That's the real problem. Americans are ignorant. They don't know what's going on.
They
It has
they
nothing to do with
they like
Russia
to
or
think
China,
they're
really, or Ukraine. I mean, we are the problem. We don't understand what's going on.
I think they enjoy being ignorant.
I don't. I don't. I think they don't want to admit that they're ignorant. Nobody enjoys being ignorant, but I think they don't want to face the fact that they might be. That's a scary thought. And I think that's explaining why a lot of people are ideological. So they don't want to admit that maybe they don't know everything. The hardest thing to do, I think it was one of your guests, Tom,
Mhm.
not Kaczynski, but whatever. He said something good. It's like, in his years of politics, he's like, the hardest thing to convince somebody of is that they've made a mistake. Right? I mean, I think it's true. So
Especially
Americans have
They,
made some
everyone
big,
thinks they
big
know
mistakes.
everything. Especially boomers. They, excuse me, boomers know everything. They know your job better than you do.
Oh, Jesus
Your
Christ.
job. I mean, how much
Boomers.
of the problems do we have in the United States now stolen lie on the boomer and their mindset?
I would say they're a victim, just like we are. Not maybe as much, but they were lied to big time, and they don't know any better. I mean, they watch television. Like, what do you expect? Television is poison.
Well,
So
look at the direction of the country. It's all kind of to please and placate the boomer, where they
yeah, because they
identify.
got money. They got the money. So the marketing's going to be for them until they die. But you know,
Where they don't let their offspring inherit property, similar to that of China. China's the same situation. They want to ride the wave.
yeah. Well, think of it from their perspective. I mean, they see their kids not doing very well, and some of that instinct is they're going to blame the kid. And it's like, well, I don't think he's ready to inherit all this. So, I can't generalize for everybody,
Like
but I think
look
that's
at
part of it.
there's no apprentice programs. I mean, they also destroyed unions, trade unions. I mean, how much of the U.S. workforce is now union work? I mean, take the government union jobs out of it. Private sector.
Unions would help, but they're not addressing, I think, the root problem, which is manyfold. But I think the bigger problem is that we don't have our nation is basically, it's not a nation, it's basically a bunch of people that are out for blood against each other. And
Mhm.
if we had more of a real nation, which was consisting of people that actually cared about each other rather than trying to rape each other, which includes the unions and management, by the way. I think they're both rotten at this point. We could work together instead of wasting time striking and arguing and trying to outsource the guy's job and, strike busting or whatever. There's so much crap that goes on in the United States because people don't like each other and they're trying to get one up on the other guy. And I'm not saying I think that should all go away because I don't think fundamentally most of the people in the United States are compatible. But I compare it to countries like Japan and Germany. I always do this, but it's like there's a reason that model was a direct threat to global capitalism, was because those people actually cared about each other a little bit more and they worked together better. And that was a real nation. That was kind of a nation state. And the American system is one of hyper global competition, including open borders, which brings in a disunited people that are harder to unify. And it actually goes right against the concepts of unionization. But as opposed to communism, which is sort of like this all workers of the world unite into this one blob of workers, it didn't really work very well. I've always viewed the national model, the family model, as a better third way alternative to running a nation. And I think we're fundamentally just not set up to work that way. Like if you had more unions, you'd have the crap that we had in the 70s where these like drunk, lazy idiots, the United Auto Workers, were putting beer cans in their fenders on Fridays getting preloaded for the weekend, and then all the cars were junk. Ralph Nader gets to run on this unsafe any speed concept, and he wasn't wrong. I mean, like, the American cars sucked. And I've worked in factories. Like, I've seen how some of these union guys are. Like, they're not necessarily the utopian alternative. Now, and I don't like actually a lot of what Jack Welch did when he ran GE. I think he outsourced way too much. I think he stripped the company of a lot of the key assets that it had. But he said something I think I agree with. The only reason you need a union is when you have managers that are jackasses. And it's unfortunate when you have a jackass for a manager that you need a union, because you unfortunately do need a union. But the better alternative is you have a good manager who cares about his workers, and workers who take responsibility and do a good job. And I've seen how you have bad management, and then you have this very lazy, adversarial, corrupt union that tries to oppose it. The end result is shitty products, shitty companies, and a lack of competitiveness. And that's exactly what happened in the United States. That's why we lost all our manufacturing to Asia, because they have a more united people that has the discipline and the IQ to produce good quality products, and they work better together. That's the real problem. And the United States I don't know if it's fixable. I mean, it's just such a mess. Like, so we're just watching
people
burn,
don't
basically.
I don't see anyone working, man. It's crazy. I mean, it blows my mind that we're still being able to get by with so many people literally, with their hand out with one way or another, whether it's pensions, like with unions, 401ks, crypto now. I mean, like, this is like, people are not producing and they're just taking.
Yeah, it's sad, but
what do you think of the inflation issue right now, too? I mean, a lot of people saw this coming down the line.
That's real.
It started with the helicopter money back in,
Well, what's your question? I mean, yeah, like, we have inflation, like, yes. So what do you
I'm just saying,
what's your question?
I think that's, if that keeps going in that direction, I mean, there's definitely going to be a lot more violence, I think. And,
yeah, maybe. I mean, I think we're just going to see a degradation of just trust even more. And if that translates to some violence, probably. I'm not, I mean, it's not optimistic or pessimistic. I just don't predict that much violence at this point from Americans, because not our basketball Americans, of course, but the rest of the country. The behavior of the aspirational class, the shrinking middle class, is basically one of, I need to stay close to the system because that's my last hope at any chance of status and wealth. And so they're very reluctant to strike, to protest, to turn over things, to talk back to their female boss. I mean, like, this has been beaten out of us for centuries, frankly. And living in urban environments only accelerates that, because your social behavior in a world where women especially are in positions of power leads to a much more feminized set of behaviors, which is sort of like indirect, like backstabbing, whispering kind of, but it's not overt masculine fighting. And so I think and you see this how the men are today. I mean, they're metrosexual and they're very weak and, oh, happy wife, happy life, and all this shit. And it's just, I don't anticipate, the type of violence, you might have seen in the 70s and the Years of Lead or something in Italy. Like, we did a show on that, and I just don't see I don't see it in the people of America to behave like that. But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Happy. Well, they're not even happy anymore.
Fat and sedated.
Did you, by any chance, read my article on the LA riots?
No. Tell me about it.
No, I know you guys did a show on that, and what prompted me to start do an article on that was what happened with this St. Floyd fucking fiasco. Like, that pales in comparison to the LA riots, where it was the deadliest
In terms
drug.
of property damage, I'm not sure about that. But what would you
Death and
compare it
property
to?
damage. I mean, it was just. I mean,
LA was big, but I mean,
2
Floyd
billion.
was everywhere though. It was all over the country and all over the world, frankly. And so I would be surprised if that did not surpass LA. But you're saying
I'll have to
it
look
didn't?
that up. But I'm just comparing LA
What did you
riots.
get your numbers? I mean,
The 2 billion.
okay, so
It was
just
2
just
billion
reiterate what's your
damage in
general
LA
thesis
riots.
here?
That's a span of like 2 or 3 days, right? I mean, that was a serious day
Maybe,
of.
maybe the pace was more, but just the scope and scale of George Floyd was insane. It's everywhere. I mean, multiple cities burned. You know,
They had
wouldn't you be surprised if that was less than LA?
well, again, I didn't look up the numbers for the
Okay.
St. Floyd one. I just know the LA riot one, but you're right,
Okay.
100%. Like they were protesting in like Auckland, New Zealand. Like and
Yeah.
and you try telling that to the norm, they go, they're protesting in Homs, Syria right now, putting up a St. Floyd shrine. Like just think about that.
Well, I think that was probably CIA pushing that one. I mean, I could see New Zealand doing it on their own, but Syria, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they thought they can get some CIA money, but they really give a shit about George Floyd. I mean,
But
I don't. I think Arabs are a little bit smarter than that, frankly.
the scale. We're talking
I
the
wouldn't put it past stupid New Zealanders who voted for that horse face, but who gave up all their guns. But I think Syrians are jaded enough to. I don't. I'm just assuming. I don't. I actually know, but
Let me ask you, Australia, what's your take on it?
it's tragedy. Never been there, but it's like, what the hell, man? I thought I had Crocodile Dundee and Mad Max, and all I got was this crappy mask, in
You see that
return.
Australia is like really vulnerable to China right now. That's the thing, like they're destabilizing our own countries within while you actually do have, external threats, at the end of the day. It's
What do you mean about
like
Australia vis-a-vis China?
we're subjugating ourselves, right? We're under attack by our own, government. Meanwhile, the rest of
Yeah.
the world's probably looking at this again. Mostly like Iran, North Korea, Russia and China are probably like, wow, they're in really bad shape right now. Like, look what they're doing. It's crazy.
I don't know what Iran's stance is, but I mean, I think again, like, do you want to be North Korea or Iran? I mean, like, I sympathize a little
True.
bit
Yeah.
more Iran, frankly. I don't think North Korea's regime is actually that good for its own people, but I can see Iran being less just like, frankly, just nepotistic and just keeping this like really decaying monarchy going. But yeah, my main point was like, that's the consequence of nationalism standing against globalism. And I'm not taking globalism's side here. It's just that is the empirical evidence of what happens when you go against the global empire. The only reason China's been able to sort of assert itself is it's just so much bigger. And Russia just, military and historically is, bigger, not economically, but, we don't have any of that. So I don't really know what we're doing here. I mean,
I don't
sort of
think it's going to be a superpower period. Like everyone, it's basically world socialism. It's pulling up the third world, bring down the first world. You overfinance, you're under industrialized, and and China's going to get stuck in that kind of that mid-tier country bracket and never really ascend. And Russia's never going to go back to the way it was neither.
Yeah.
EU's falling apart too at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, what do you see anything positive?
The only positive thing I could think of is if we further, if inflation continues at its rate, perhaps regions are going to break off and they're going to be little semi-autonomous zones throughout the United States, and will resemble something more like Mexico or something from, South America.
Yeah, well, there again, I mean, like, look what happened to Mexico, cartels, So I
Well,
I don't know anybody in this dissident movement that I would expect to be as frankly as clever as the cartels and as vicious as them in order to assert their own sovereignty. I'm not pro cartel, by the way, but I think they're a menace to the Mexican
but
people and the world.
I
But
don't see violence the way we see violence in South America. I mean, we
yeah,
already have a large swath of gang population here, and the El Salvadorian gangs know they have to get along with the population, the majority, so they don't necessarily go after whitey per se, as one would like to think. They kind of
are you
just
talking about them here? Okay.
here, right? Not the same case in their home
Yeah.
countries, but
I never thought about that. I don't know what MS-13's like homicide rate is against like their own gang members, but I would imagine it's like a large number of it is internal as opposed to external. I've heard that too from James LaFond, is that the Hispanic gangs are a little bit smarter and that they don't want to destroy their own customer base.
correct.
And that's like a a good read on how things might work in a slightly more forward-thinking population group who's reverted to gang behavior, as opposed to some of our friends from Compton. But
Well,
I don't know. Anyway, we're sort of going on and on here. What else do you want to cover
No,
before we
that's
wrap?
about it. My computer's about to die anyway. Listen, that was an absolute pleasure talking to you. That was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, is there anything you're working on in particular worth discussing before we wrap up the night?
Well, I alluded to briefly that I'm working on something. I mentioned this on Tim Kelly's show. I don't think I articulated it very well, but the gist of it is I'm looking for hard evidence via some data science that will demonstrate better decisions to be made for any of us in this thing, especially, but in general, anyone who wants to live a good life, what they need to do. And specifically, what do they need to do in terms of picking a career? What do they need to do in terms of picking a partner for raising a family? What do they need to do in terms of making wealth, intergenerational wealth, so that they can set up their heirs to be successful in the future? I think there's a lot of work on our side about critiquing the corruption, which I think is fine. But it doesn't have much practical value to us once we recognize that. And it's sort of repetitive, frankly, to keep doing that type of work. And I don't think it's very useful for people who've been in this for a certain amount of time. So I'm trying to make a real contribution here in terms of improving our lot so that we can become stronger and have some sovereignty and power, frankly, in the long run. But I don't think that's necessarily very appealing to a lot of people because they want to think very grandly, very grandiosely, perhaps. And frankly, I think they fantasize about a future that involves, running Panzer tanks through the White House. And I mean, I wouldn't shed any tears if that happened, but I don't see it being very likely. So I would unfortunately be that, like, I would be the pastor that I would want to see in a church that doesn't seem to exist, that would basically say, look, here's what you need to do, guys, in order to get a wife. Okay. And then you're married. This is how you keep them. And then this is how you make sure your kids don't fall into the clutches of global homo, like most of your daughters and, some of your sons are going to end up most likely. We need to figure this out because we're really in a bad position right now. And I do not hear anybody really coming up with good solutions. I'm not saying I'm going to come up with a great solution, but what I'm doing is I'm researching historically what has worked for people. And it's a huge project. I'm working pretty much by myself on it. It's overwhelming, but I haven't really met anybody who has the skill set and the motivation to work on it with me. So I've tried, but I just haven't met anybody who's willing to do it. So you need to have an understanding of machine learning and data science, and most people don't. So but that's what I'm working on. I don't know when it's going to be finished, but I'm not going to release it until it's any good, because I think, again, it's like, what are we doing here? Are we trying to sell books? Or are we trying to sell like a winning strategy and help people? And I'm trying to do the latter, hopefully. I'm sick of being a podcaster, and that's it. We should be running things, and it's just not happening because the people who run things see us as a threat, and they're not wrong, but they're in power and we're not, and we need to get in power before we can have any influence on policy. And talking about policy is not really going to get us anywhere. We need to get power first, and then we can maybe implement some policy. The whole like, oh, infiltrate the GOP thing. I mean, more power to you. I don't have the patience for that, but I think the easiest gains we're going to get is by getting our own businesses going, getting our families going, becoming relevant to our local communities. Going from there, it's boring. It's not exciting, but it's unfortunately historically how any tribe who is under the thumb of an empire gets anywhere. You have to do the groundwork, and nobody wants to do it, but it's necessary.
Well, a lot of people take the black pill, which is basically lack of motivation. They got their pizza.
It's lazy. Yeah, it's lazy. I mean, I don't blame anybody for getting frustrated, but you need to get past that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are going to lose. Definitely, you'll guaranteed to lose if you give up. Guaranteed. So.
Well, listen, man, that was awesome. Let's keep in touch. I'll definitely be posting a couple more articles on the American Sun relating to real estate. So once I post something, maybe we'll do this again. All right.
Sure. Yeah, you can come to our website or contact us, myth20c.com. But Lamprey's got a great show, and I would highly recommend anybody who's intelligent to keep listening, because I've enjoyed his stuff. So and his writing as well.
Well, listen, coming from you, that means a lot. Thank you so much, and you have a great night. All right.
All right. Yeah, and everybody, just stay strong. You're not alone, and just keep working at it, and work with other people. And if you make some progress, people will notice. I think that's the big thing we all need to remember.
Very good, man. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
I wish to disgrace. America should matter. I wish to disgrace. America should matter. America should matter. I wish to disgrace. America should matter. I wish to disgrace.